in a world where the line between life and death is blurred. Stetch Atelier, a man resurrected by a sentient artifact, embarks on a relentless quest for revenge. With each dungeon, his powers grow, but so do the dangers he must face. Alliances are forged and betrayed. The artifact's secrets are revealed, but at a cost. The line between justice and vengeance blurred. And as he delves deeper into the dungeons, the true nature of the world around him begins to unravel. But the journey is far from over. Prepare for a story of power, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of revenge. The deeper he goes, the darker it gets.
Howdy. The story begins in a quiet and dark place that looks like a labyrinth with tall pillars, and blue light is glowing as if it is taking in all the energy of the place. A vast horde of monsters can be found in the dungeon at any given time, some exhibiting fish-like visages and jagged, menacing teeth, while others flaunt intimidating horns, vicious fangs, and eyes that emit a fiery glow. There are mighty monsters that wield sharp, blood-drenched weapons in their fists. However, none of this occurs without a cause. It has been rumored that hidden in the dungeon's center lie mysterious artifacts endowed with incredible powers. As time passes, a dungeon becomes increasingly formidable and treacherous, and when it is finally overcome, it bestows powerful and invaluable relics. It. On the bright sunny day with some clouds in the sky, the cool wind is blowing, and there we can see a dense forest. Somewhere in this forest, an exchange is taking place between two people, with one of them shouting for the other to stop pulling on the shield and to stay put. A person was stretching out their hand to grab a wild pink blossom dangling from a tree, when the individual who had been shouting previously cautioned them against making contact with it, as it was a toxic plant that could poison and injure them if they touched it. On hearing this, the man with the armor was surprised and informed, and he also apologized to his companion. This companion is a handsome-looking man with brown hair and brown eyes, and he warns the man in the armor not to do anything on his own because they are very close to a labyrinth. We are told that this man's name is Stetch, and he also goes by the Explorer. He was looking at his watch when someone called out to him and asked him to come and have a look. The man who called him looks like royalty with glowing armor. He stops walking and asks the Explorer, in amazement, "Is this the place? Have they reached the dungeon?" The Explorer claims this is one of the kingdom's oldest dungeons. The person in the glowing armor is the prince, and he orders his subordinate commander to unwind all the things and get ready for his soldiers, as they will enter the dungeon immediately. The commander was surprised because they just reached the place, and without any rest, it would be dangerous to enter the dungeon. The prince responds by saying that they have been away for a full 14 days, and his siblings who remain in the kingdom would resort to various tactics in their quest to gain the upper hand in the race to succeed to the throne. The commander says he understands and will do as the prince wishes. The Explorer reflects on the discussion taking place and imagines how beneficial it would be for the prince to be accompanied by a multitude of soldiers and to recruit a top-tier adventurer such as himself. He dismisses the thought, thinking that for him it was a very good offer, as he would make a fortune out of it. Following this, he reflects on the risky prospects that are in store, once they realize that the dungeon they must enter is a level A dungeon. He later assures himself that everything will work out as the prince has an army with him and all of them look quite powerful. The prince orders the Explorer to lead them and enter the dungeon. The Explorer uses his skill Pathfinder level 7, which allows the user to find the shortest route to the destination. The job of an A-class Explorer is to find the safest and shortest route. The Explorer also activates another skill, Animal Instinct level 6, which enhances the user's senses and gives them the ability of echolocation. These abilities are beyond any normal human as they allow the user to use sonar detection and vibration detection, which is like a wizard's clairvoyance. The explorer stands at the entrance of the dungeon using his skills, while the soldiers following him doubt him and question whether they can trust him. In response, the soldier states that the prince must have had a good reason to hire him, so they should put their trust in the prince's judgment. The entire group descended into the dungeon, with the explorer taking the lead and urging the rest of the military contingent to pay close attention to their surroundings and be mindful of the ceiling's potential hazards. The commander and the soldiers looked at the ceiling with surprise and saw pointy and sharp stone edges hanging from the ceiling. The soldier, examining this, asks the explorer how he became aware of its existence. The explorer responds that he could hear the sound of a flowing spring hidden behind the walls with each step he took, and it appears to be some sort of trap. The explorer noted that the traps were likely to be original to the dungeon's formation and could be activated by something as simple as stepping on the floor. The soldiers were very surprised to hear this. The explorer continued to move forward cautiously, disarming all the traps in the way. By using his abilities, he carefully observed every minor detail in the dungeon and successfully conquered each hurdle that came his way. They soon arrived at the final section of the dungeon, where they paused, and the explorer privately contemplated that they had come to the end and it would become increasingly challenging from this point forward. It is because they are now in the core of the dungeon and are going to face the dungeon keeper, who protects the artifact. As an explorer, he could not do anything more than this because, let's face it, he was not a wizard or a warrior. The commander steps forward and asks the explorer where they have reached, to which the explorer nods. The commander orders the soldiers with shields to get into formation and advance towards the target. He then asks the explorer how they will call the dungeon keeper, to which the explorer already has an answer. He quickly grabbed a stone and threw it at the entrance of the gate. A roar was heard, and a massive release of energy was felt, which took everyone by surprise. Suddenly, a huge monster is seen coming out of the gate, which looks like a huge blue lion with very strong armor all around his body. This monster was a Tarask, a high-level monster. On seeing the monster, the soldiers panicked. The commander orders them to hold their ground and move forward. The monster blew a huge breath of fire from his mouth, making it very hard to defend the soldiers. The commander commanded them to use Shield Wall, which is a level 6 skill that forms a shield and, when used, gives the people resistance against physical and magical attacks. He then orders the archers in the group to attack and aim for the monster's face. But the flames and the wind pressure were too strong for the soldiers to accurately aim for the monster's face. Commander grinned his teeth, thinking that this monster was way stronger than he thought, and he too could not see anything because of the flames. Suddenly, he got an idea and called out for the explorer. He asked the explorer if he could use his skills to aim at the monster's mouth, to which the explorer replied that he had never done it before. The commander shouted that he must do it as they were all pushed to a corner. The explorer bared his teeth in a grin and internally acknowledged that this wasn't the scenario he had anticipated. However, he managed to compose himself and declared that, as a top-tier explorer, he would give it his best shot. He takes the bow in his hand and aims at the monster. He uses his skill Animal Instinct and shoots the arrow. The arrow flew straight into the monster's mouth. The explorer was surprised that he managed to shoot the monster in the mouth. The monster yelled in pain, losing focus in the battle. The commander orders his men to keep their eyes on the target, as this will get even more difficult. Suddenly, the explorer was surprised when the monster started attacking him in close combat. He somehow managed to dodge it, but a soldier was not so lucky. He was instantly killed by the monster's blow. The explorer was running, and he shouted at the commander to do something about the monster. The soldiers in turn shot arrows at the monsters, but they were all deflected because of the monster's thick armor. The monster kept on demolishing everything in sight, upon the commander's command for his troops to perform a shield bash to bring down the monster. As the monster was about to crush the explorer with his paw, the soldiers used the skill Shield Bash level 5, which knocked the monster down. The monster gets up and looks at the soldiers in front of him. Meanwhile, the commander manages to sneak to his rear and manages to attack him. The attack was successful, and the monster had a deep cut in his eye. The commander ordered his men to use Shield Bash again. The soldiers immediately carried out his order and attacked the monster with a Shield Bash. The monster was thrown out of his balance and knocked down on the floor. The prince acted swiftly, using the situation to his advantage, jumping up with his sword and striking the monster with a decisive blow. The blow from the prince was so strong that everyone present at the moment was shocked to witness it, and the prince took his sword, dripping with the monster's blood, and smiled. Cheers were heard from everyone, and they started to celebrate their victory over the dungeon keeper. The explorer struggled to accept the reality before him, and he reflected that the time had finally come for him to personally observe an artifact, as he had never done so up until this point. The group started to enter the heart of the dungeon when the prince called the explorer and asked him, "Is it true that the explorer hasn't been able to clear a single dungeon even though he is an A-class explorer?" To which the explorer nodded affirmatively with a look of embarrassment on his face. The prince mentioned that the reason he was unable to continue was due to the dungeon keeper, since the explorer had skillfully deactivated all the traps. So, was it that the explorer would see an artifact for the first time? Suddenly, a ring with a skull on its front and green energy emitting out of it is shown, which is an astonishing sight to behold. The explorer said yes, to which the prince asked him to have a look at it and touch it with a confident smile on his face. The explorer was surprised that the prince asked him to touch the artifact and was not worried that he could take it, try to steal it and run away with it. The prince chuckles and remarks that it's one potential outcome, but it will also result in a dire consequence, as the explorer will be immediately put to death. The explorer chuckled and, with eyes shining with anticipation, examined the artifact. He realized that, as per the prince's proposition, all except the artifact in the dungeon would be his to keep, which he considered to be a lucrative deal. Furthermore, the explorer thinks that he should take the opportunity to look at the artifact closely and move his hand towards the ring. As the explorer was about to touch the ring, it was seen that the prince had an evil look on his face and smiled viciously. When the explorer touched the ring, it began to emit a shocking amount of energy, wrapping around him and causing unbearable pain, leading to loud screams. The sight of the explorer's skin splitting open and his screams left everyone present in a state of confusion, with blood pouring out of his mouth. After some time, the explorer fell to the ground in great pain, his body all ripped off with his skin. The prince and commander stood near him and looked at him. The prince apologizes for causing trouble, but he asserts that it was essential because the artifacts are afflicted with a significant amount of negative energy and curses, which are transferred to the first person who handles them. The explorer, racked with agony and weeping, struggled to pay attention to the prince's words, and the prince subsequently drew his blade and severed the hand of the explorer, who continued to clutch the artifact. After cutting the hand, he orders the commander to collect the artifact as the curse has been lifted, and now they can get out of the dungeon. While taking the ring, the commander noticed that the ring had something attached to it that looked like veins. Suddenly, the artifact started to activate, and a huge skull was seen emitting powerful energy from it. The energy was so powerful that the prince and commander took a step back, protecting themselves. A screen appears that warns of a high risk and activates the skill for automatic recovery. The explorer's body was enveloped with powerful green energy all around him, and he started to shout. The commander tells the explorer to halt and advances towards him with his sword, preparing to attack, but to his amazement, the sword goes right through the explorer, leaving him unharmed. He then orders all the archers to attack the explorer, and the archers shoot the arrows towards the explorer, but it also does not work. The prince had a confused look at it and thought that this artifact could be one of the rare types, the synchro type. But as the prince was thinking all this, the explorer started to levitate, still yelling in pain, which took everyone by surprise, and they backed off a bit. Suddenly, the dungeon started to collapse, and the floor started to crack very quickly. The prince and commander looked worried at the collapsing floor, and the commander told the prince that they must run away to survive. We can see that the floor was collapsing at a rapid rate, and many of the soldiers had already fallen to their deaths. The commander quickly took out an existing scroll, which is used to escape a dungeon. The prince found it hard to accept the situation unfolding before him and exclaimed that he would not allow the artifact to escape his grasp, having worked so diligently for it. He swung his sword to attack the explorer and collect the artifact, but his hand was stopped by the commander, who shouted escape. The prince shouted the explorer's name in fury as he disappeared from the dungeon through teleportation, and the explorer was witnessed plummeting into the depths of the dungeon due to its collapse. A screen becomes visible with the information that the artifact Memento Mortem has chosen the explorer as an ally. Deep in the dungeon, a river is flowing with rocks beside it, where the explorer is seen to be coming out. His body recovered from the curse that inflicted tremendous pain on him. His hand, still holding the ring tightly in his fist, comes out of the water and coughs. He lies on the banks of the river and wonders where he is and what this place is. Grinning his teeth with both eyes closed, the explorer makes a painful sound as his body is still in pain. Suddenly, he opens one of his eyes and looks at the green energy emitting from his hand, and to his surprise, he sees that the ring that he was holding earlier is now mysteriously on his finger. Contemplating the ring, he recollects the recent events, such as the prince's treachery and the curse that has been imposed on him. He wonders why he is still alive, considering that he should have perished by now, and now finds himself lost and contemplating how to make his way back. The dude totally forgot about his skills. While he was talking to himself, he heard someone agree with him, saying he was right, that the explorer died, and calling him his useless ally. A giant skull seems to manifest itself in front of the explorer, having emerged from the ring and begun to converse with him, an occurrence that he finds too astonishing to accept as real. The prince was amazed that they managed to come out of the dungeon. He questioned them in alarm as he became aware that they were the only two who had the chance to escape from the group. The commander asked the prince to settle down. The prince was reluctant to take this action because he disagreed with the commander's decision to use the scroll. If the commander had not utilized the scroll, they would not have escaped, and he could have still gotten his hands on the artifact. Hitting the commander in the chest with his fist, the angry prince yelled at the commander and was not in a pleasant mood. The prince thought that his siblings were likely aware that he commanded a group of troops and should not have permitted them to suffer defeat. They witnessed the explorer's body mysteriously come back to life, and to his knowledge, no artifact was capable of achieving this feat. Recalling the events, the prince dismissed the notion that the parasitic type cannot survive like that when the owner is dead. They had never encountered anything similar before, and they initially thought it was an independent artifact, but Prince dismissed all the possibilities. He thinks that this is an artifact of the synchro type. They haven't encountered this before. Artifacts known to most people can be categorized into two types, the most common being independent. These artifacts carry out the will of the person using them, and they are easy to use as a tool. The other is the parasitic type. The artifact destroys itself when the owner is dead, but it is a very powerful kind of artifact. The mentioned are two highly recognized artifacts currently. But now they have seen another one that can revive dead hosts, the synchro type. The prince and the commander still could not believe the resurrection they witnessed. It's unbelievable that he could live through the destruction of the dungeon, and for them, it would have been better if he had passed away. However, as they have decided to return to the capital, passing through cities that lie in their path, the prince asks the commander to keep a prize on his head and put wanted posters of the explorer wherever possible. The explorer wonders what his next step is. He was suddenly struck by a massive jolt of power since he refused to go along and didn't know which area he was in. The explorer, in pain, looked at the skill and asked what the skull desired from him. The huge skull said using his passive skill, the skull kept the explorer from dying. This skill was known as soul recovery. The skull told him that to revive him, he had used up all his stored energy. Wondering how he was communicating with an artifact, the explorer asked if it had a name. Mortem, the skull replied. He pondered whether any other artifacts possessed abilities similar to those of Mortem. The explorer was trying to find a way out of the dungeon. As he had no option, he started climbing the wall and wondered how many other abilities the artifact had. As he knows, only one unique power is attached to one artifact, and if he exchanges it for money, he will make a fortune. He asked Mortem how many abilities he possessed, and he replied 50. After hearing this, the explorer was unable to maintain his composure and tumbled to the ground, as an individual couldn't possess more than 15 abilities throughout their lifetime. Even with some kinds of enhancement, the limit does not exceed 20. The explorer realized that with one artifact, He had so many abilities under his control that he asked Mortem to show him one of his powerful abilities. Mortem denied it and explained that since he had already spent all his mana on resurrecting, by the time he recovered, they had urgent business to discuss. The explorer had no idea what mana was, but Mortem, without wasting time, told him that he had 10 hours left before he died. The explorer, confused, asked Mortem if he had already brought him to life, so how could he die so soon? That does not make any sense. Mortem explained that now they are both dependent on each other as they're now linked, and if one dies for some reason, the other will also die. Since Mortem is running out of mana, he has only 10 hours left. He further added that since he activated him, it did not make him the slave of the explorer, but it could help him get stronger. The explorer, on hearing this bizarre explanation, quickly managed to get out of the dungeon and was running through the forest at a very high speed. While running, the explorer asks Mortem for a way to recover his mana, to which he responds that he has the skill of curse eating, which can make curses and monsters his snacks. The explorer understood and started to look for some monsters when Mortem reminded him that only 8 hours were remaining. The explorer tries to use his skill, but Mortem says that it won't work as his power has been reduced since both of them are on the verge of death. The explorer was shocked, but he had no time to waste, so he started looking for some monster marks and prints in the forest. Soon, following a foul smell, the explorer luckily found a big wolf who was having his lunch. Recalling the power down, he asked Mortem about its duration. Mortem told him it would be 5 minutes, and the explorer was relieved. Mortem explained that the greater the skill, the longer the power down duration. The explorer understood and started to think of a way to kill the wolf, and Mortem said that he had a basic skill used by magicians in battles that would do the trick, but the explorer had only one shot as they were out of fuel. Hearing this, the explorer facepalmed himself, thinking, why couldn't anything today go his way? But dismissing the thought, he prepared himself and focused. He aimed for a vital point at the wolf, took a deep breath, and instructed Mortem to wait for his signal. The explorer lacked confidence and his hands were shaking. All this was making Mortem very irritated, and as soon as he got the right opportunity, he used the skill Air Bullet. A green laser-like energy rushed through the ring in the direction of the wolf with a speed that pierced not only the monster but almost everything in the way. The explorer could not believe what just happened and wondered how this skill could just be a basic magician skill. The wolf was killed. In fact, it was torn up into 2 pieces. The explorer was amazed to see it, and he could not believe that on one hand, Mortem claimed it to be a basic magic skill, but on the other, the level of power was just off the charts, as his mind is not able to comprehend it. Suddenly, the explorer realized artifact that Mortem did not wait for his signal to shoot. Mortem replied that he was getting irritated when the explorer was not able to take any action and was lacking confidence. Besides, he claimed that it was a very rare artifact that used some useless powers, and all his powers were incredible. If it were not for his power, they would not have been able to kill the wolf. The explorer looked at the dead wolf lying on the forest floor in 2 pieces, and hearing this explanation, he said, yeah, it's true, but just to avoid his embarrassment, he dismissed the topic. He then pointed his hand towards the dead wolf, and Mortem started having his lunch. The kingdom's royal capital is governed by King Vada, who is a father to 3 princes. The eldest of the lot was Ricky, the second one was Alpha, and the third was our prince, Harry, who was just coming back and making a big boo-boo. As the oldest, Ricky was the most powerful of the 3 siblings in their pursuit of the throne, causing the other 2 to attempt various methods to gain their father's favor and gain an advantage. In an attempt to gain recognition, Harry sought after an artifact. However, now his actions would result in him being regarded as an immature and spoiled individual by everyone. The story returns to somewhere in the forest, where Mortem is having lunch. The explorer asked him if he was done. He was kind of disappointed, as he thought the skill would be a visual spectacle. Mortem replied, just for a mere wolf, what did he expect? Suddenly, the explorer claimed that only 10% of the mana was charged. Mortem responded that to charge the mana more, they would have to kill more powerful monsters. The explorer understood and started planning his next action. He thought that since he had the artifact with him, there could be a possibility that the army would be on the hunt for him. So it's better than before entering another labyrinth he collects some of his stuff from a nearby town. The explorer quickly arrived at the edge of the town, where he observed two individuals standing guard, each armed with large and pointed spears. He was thinking of a way to get past them when his eyes stumbled upon a rare grass that could be refined to make a sleeping gas. This dude gets a lot of rare items casually. He took the grass, refined it using the wood, and then burned it a little. Then he stored the burning grass in a bag. Mortem was at a loss regarding the explorer's intentions, while the explorer stayed concentrated and took steps to deal with the smoke produced by the grass. He approached the guards while holding a bag, out of which smoke was coming, having been produced by the grass inside. The guards were alerted upon seeing the smoke and wondered where it was coming from. But before they could investigate it or take any action, the smoke had its effect on them, and they started to feel dizzy, and soon they fell unconscious on the ground. On seeing the whole ordeal, Mortem was impressed and applauded the explorer. The explorer, feeling proud, said he was a wanderer and had to face some tight situations in the past. He was in the middle of patting himself on the back when his eyes caught sight of something that transformed his facial expression. There was a wanted poster of him that claimed him to be a robber, and he also had a 500 coin prize on his head. Mortem was quite amused by this and started to laugh loudly, whereas the opposite was true for the explorer. The explorer looked on both sides to see if someone noticed him, and he took the poster and crumbled it angrily. He then quickly took all his belongings from the place and started to move out. On his way, he looked at the poster again and wondered how far the news of him being a robber had reached. He then concluded that, for some time, he would not be able to visit this town freely. He reflects on methods to retaliate against the prince and takes comfort in the fact that he has capabilities that go beyond his norm as long as he has the artifact. He was frustrated that he was betrayed and killed, and after all that, he was being portrayed as a bad person here. He tightly curls his fist, crumbling the poster, and then throws it away in the river. Witnessing the explorer worried and frustrated, Mortem asks him if he seeks revenge. The explorer stated that any regular person would feel compelled to retaliate given the situation, but since he was merely an ordinary explorer, what recourse did he have? Upon hearing this, Mortem reveals that he has the ability to exact revenge using his growing powers, as they strengthen by taking in mana. The stronger the mana, the stronger the power at his disposal. The explorer thought about it and asked Mortem whether he could also absorb other artifacts. To which Mortem replied that he could, and they will be the prime source of strong mana, and if they could manage to get their hands on that mana, he could help a lot in getting the explorer his revenge on the prince. The explorer gets pumped and asks Mortem if he is serious about this, and if he does as Mortem instructs, he can have his revenge for real. Mortem replies affirmatively and says if the explorer does as he says, the explorer will witness power that would be beyond his wildest imagination. We are now taken to a place that looks like a tavern, where people of all kinds are having a good time. Suddenly, a warrior calls out to the bartender and asks where he could find good materials that would be normally priced. The bartender cleaning the glass replied that he could have a look at the black market, but the warrior said that he had already checked and their price was higher than the Eiffel Tower. The bartender noticed a poster beneath the warrior's hand, who was having his drink with all sorts of expressions on his face. The bartender grabs hold of the poster and, as he examines it more closely, identifies a face he knows, which prompts him to question what mischief this individual has been up to recently. The story moves back to the explorer, who was trying to enter a city. But at the entrance of the city, the guards were having a check, and in order to get past them, they needed a permit on a wood. If a person did not have this permit, either the person wouldn't be allowed to enter or his belongings would be confiscated. But the explorer knew this city well, so he thought of entering the city through a hidden passage from where the things for the black market entered the city. Mortem, in a confusing tone, said that he thought they were leaving straight for the dungeon. And why are they here? The explorer informed him that their purpose for being there was to obtain the scroll that was once used to escape the dungeons. Entering a dungeon without it could result in death, and it's crucial to always be prepared before embarking on an adventure. Listening to him, Mortem asked, "Is it the same scroll that the prince used to get out of the labyrinth?" The explorer responded affirmatively and finally reached the gate of the hidden passage. He had a huge smile on his face and told Mortem that they'd reached. He knocked on the door, and a voice from the other side asked for the password. All these hidden passages have passwords, and they keep changing every month. The explorer gave a code, but the voice from the other side said that it was 6 months old, to which the explorer replied that he hadn't visited the city in a long time, so this was the last password he knew. On hearing the explorer's voice, the man on the other side recognized him and opened the door. We see that this man was none other than the bartender. He was very excited to see the explorer, who was his old friend, and gave him a tight hug. The hug was so tight that the explorer was not able to breathe at all. He then leaves the explorer and asks what's up with him. The explorer took a long breath and said he wouldn't believe it if he told him, and he needed his help for some urgent work. The bartender agrees to help him and offers him some food and drinks at his tavern, where all the people are already chilling and some are just killing time. The explorer came in and later said that he wanted to sell some goods he collected along the way. Seeing the goods, the bartender asked him if he had stolen all these goods because there was a poster of him flying around the city. The explorer dismissed the notion, and he organized his goods and started to sell them inside the tavern. Soon, the items got everyone's attention, and they started to check the items he was selling. Meanwhile, the explorer asked the bartender for a loan, as he needed it to buy the scrolls for entering the dungeon. The bartender laughs and says why he wants to enter the dungeon, and that too without any support. The explorer said that he'd tell him everything afterward, and right now he's on the clock as the prince was also looking for him, and he at least needs 4 scrolls, and he'd return the loan in 2 to 3 days. The bartender immediately said he did not have anything on him, and the explorer made a funny face on hearing it. He then tells the bartender that he must get his hands on the scrolls and that he also needs some new equipment for the dungeon. The bartender, with a smile on his face, said that he could help him with that and asked to meet the guy who was taking a nap on the table behind him. His name was Clay. The explorer went to the table and called Clay, but he was fast asleep and was not waking up. Since there was no way out, the explorer angrily slammed his fist onto the table, producing a loud crash that startled him awake. With a very dizzy look, Clay woke up, was irritated, and asked the explorer if he was in the mood to fight or what. The explorer took a step back and said that it was not why he woke him up. The reason was that he wanted some scrolls and some equipment for his adventure. On hearing this, Clay had tears in his eyes and told the explorer that he had been there for a few days and no one was buying his equipment, even when he lowered the prices by 50%. The shiny equipment attracted the attention of both of them, and Clay, with tears in his eyes, remarked that people often failed to believe in the legitimacy of these weapons, which led to customers not buying them. The explorer asked to suggest something, and if he liked it, he'd take it, but he asked him to show his finest creations, and he'd buy them at a 50% discount. On hearing this, Clay was shocked. At first, he thought a 50% discount on his finest was a bit too much to ask, but he later agreed to it. He showed him a gun and said that it would be fit for him as it is a range-based weapon and he did not need to get into close combat. Holding the weapon, the explorer was trying to aim and liked it. Clay also suggested a trident in case of close combat, which was looking amazing on the explorer. Suddenly Mortem appeared and said, why is he wasting his time on these useless weapons? And claimed that they were not of good quality. The explorer liked the weapons and, in a frustrated voice, asked Mortem how he could say that, to which Mortem replied that he could feel the potential of all these weapons and that the ones he liked were up to no good. The explorer calmed down and asked him how he knew all this. Mortem replied that he was an artifact, and he could see the potential of a weapon that normal humans are incapable of. The explorer asked Mortem to choose one in that case, and Mortem browsed through the weapons that were there and then said that he could go for the sword. He also added that as long as the explorer masters this weapon, it will turn out to be a lifesaver for him in the future. The explorer took the sword in his hand and thought that it was quite big for him, but he had faith in Mortem and kept it. Later that day, the explorer went to the nearby dungeon. and after some time, they faced a huge group of monsters with pointy horns. The explorers were killing them one by one, but they kept on coming, and it seemed like their numbers were only increasing instead of decreasing. On killing a bunch of them, he saw red eyes glowing in a cave, and now that the explorer had it, he aimed at the group of monsters and asked Mortem to shoot. A huge wave of energy was seen, which took out all the monsters in one shot. The heads of some monsters were the only things present, while others had only a few sections of their bodies. After killing all the monsters, Mortem had a great feast with his curse-eating skill, and the explorer was surprised that even after killing so many monsters, the mana level did not increase as much as he expected. Once Mortem was done, he took the pickaxe with him and entered the cave, which we can see was full of quality crystals. The explorer was happy to see the cave and started to mine. While mining, he thought to himself, how was he supposed to take all of this back to the city? While mining, he came across the parts that were the essential components for the traps in the dungeon. He thought to himself that he could use them as well. Suddenly, he heard a weird sound coming from a cave, and he became alarmed. He told Mortem to make sure he was ready for whatever was heading their way, and then, without warning, a colossal cave lizard charged in, fixed its gaze on the explorer and unleashed a thunderous roar. The explorer could not believe his eyes, and he never thought that a high-class monster would be down here. He discarded his pickaxe and slowly began to retreat to prevent any issues. The monster looked at the explorer very carefully with its fiery eyes, while the explorer was just stunned by looking at the monster. He was way too scared to think of a plan. Suddenly, the lizard made its move and charged in. It jumped and threw a vicious fire breath at the explorer. The explorer barely managed to dodge it, and the fire grazed his shoulder. The explorer was hurt and was not able to think straight, and Mortem told him to settle down, otherwise, it would be their last day on Earth. Mortem, using its recovery skill, patches up the explorer. He comes to understand that the cave-dwelling lizard utilizes toxic materials and assimilates minerals. Therefore, his body is stronger than a diamond, and using any skill against him would be useless. The explorer can't think of anything, so just to give it a shot, he wants to use the air bullet, but Mortem yells at him to stop and says if he uses the skill, then it will collapse the cave as they are far too far away. The explorer was thinking about what to do next so as not to die, and the monster kept attacking him with his fiery breath. While the explorer kept dodging, Mortem suggested using the sword he bought from Clay. The explorer was startled, and Mortem said this was an emergency, and if he did not do it, what other choice did they have? The explorer understood the mission and drew his sword, and he inserted a bullet of blue liquid into the sword. The monster kept charging in, but this time so did the explorer. The lizard stopped as it was surprised at the speed of the human. The explorer's moves were so fast that the monster lost sight of him, and grabbing the opportunity, he jumped at the monster with the sword. While he didn't see it, he held the sword with both hands firmly and attacked the lizard on its head. Upon Mortem's order, he successfully shoots a bullet that slightly penetrates the monster's head, and he pushes the sword's button with all his strength, causing it to sink deeper. The explorer jumps to the floor as the monster dies because of the acid in the bullet. As the monster dies, the explorer expresses his disappointment with the weapon, even though he bought it to fight against the dungeon keeper. The blue bullets are very hard to get, and there are only 4 bullets left. Mortem started having his snack, and he suddenly realized that something was wrong as it was not the usual taste. He asked the explorer to be on his toes, and the explorer could not understand it as they had just killed the lizard. As the explorer was arguing with Mortem about being cautious, suddenly a huge roar was heard from their rear. Another cave lizard was charging towards them, and this was coming in way too fast. The explorer took a defensive stance and drew out his sword again. He once more loaded the sword with a blue bullet, and informed Mortem that he should not expend all his bullets in this location on these lizards, as they were intended as their trump card for the dungeon master. The huge lizard lunges at the explorer and tries to rip off the explorer with his claws. The explorer somehow manages to dodge it, and while doing so, he sees an opening for an attack. He grabs the opportunity and tries to attack at the vital point of the lizard, but this one is more ferocious. The lizard caught onto the explorer and, in return, struck him with his tail. The explorer managed to shield himself with the sword, but the impact was huge. Following his setback, he speculated that the lizard may have been involved in a greater number of battles, owing to its adeptness at protecting itself and its knack for leveraging its body effectively. But recalling his past events, he said that, in comparison to the lion he fought earlier, this creature was nothing but a tiny lizard. His eyes shone with confidence as he charged in and attacked the lizard. The cave monster defended itself with its hand, and even when attacked with a sharp sword, only a little scratch was seen. The explorer was surprised and thought to himself that this had an even greater defense than the previous one. While the explorer was engaged in his thoughts, the lizard took the chance and attacked the explorer with a tail attack. This one could have proved to be a good Pokemon. This time it was a direct attack on the explorer, and he was thrown way back in pain. Mortem asked the explorer to be careful, as his life was also dependent on the explorer, so there was no need to take unnecessary risks. He further added that this lizard was very different from the last one. The explorer, in a tone of discomfort, stated that he was already aware of this information. However, he argued that as a living being, it must possess a vulnerability. As he was trying to complete his sentence, he saw that the lizard's claw was next to his face. The lizard grabbed his face and slammed him to the ground. Mortem angrily declared to him that he was a fool, pointing out that he was losing his composure in the heat of battle, similar to a baby. The explorer guarantees to him that getting attacked in this way is intentional since the monster is now within close range. He further added that in his left hand, he had some sparkly powder, and in his right hand, he had some fiery powder, and if you mix these two, you will create a bomb. He joined his two hands and threw the powder at him, which made a huge flash, blinding the monster for some time. Taking this opportunity, the explorer grabbed his sword and charged straight for the lizard's mouth. He then shouted "Almighty push" and attacked the monster. Suddenly, Mortem got a notification with a warning message that the lizard's body contained 95% of abnormal tissues. Seeing this, Mortem asked the explorer not to engage and to wait, but it was too late. The explorer was already in midair performing the almighty push following a huge explosion, and Mortem yelled for the explorer. After the huge explosion, we see that the explorer's body flew away and fell to the floor. Mortem quickly activates his recovery skill to heal the wounded body of the explorer, and after some time, the explorer regains consciousness. On seeing this, Mortem yells at him and asks him why he did not wait when he was told to do so. Replying to the ring, the explorer said that he should tell him to wait before he charges in, not when he is in midair. Opening his eyes, he asked Mortem what happened to the lizard and how the situation was now. We could see that a part of the floor was melted and smoke was still coming out because of the huge explosion. Mortem further added that the monster's body was not normal and was modified. The explorer could not understand what Mortem meant, so Mortem explained that there was something in this labyrinth that modified the cave lizard's body, and if it did for one, it could have done for more. The explorer still could not comprehend it and asked the ring if it meant that from now on, each monster they faced could be this strong and could explode at any point, which could be fatal for them. Mortem was not sure of the answer and asked him if he was scared if that were the case. The explorer smirked and declared that he was not scared anymore as he had already died once, and no matter who was waiting for him on the other side, he was going to face it head on. He then activates his skill in pathfinding, and blue energy starts to spread to check for the shortest and safest route available for the explorer. After finding the path, they started to move, and he then used his animal instinct, but to his surprise, the results were not as he expected. He was not able to detect any danger nearby, and while on their way, they came across a skeleton of a monster. Mortem explains that if they get too close to the energy in time, the being can turn into a stone and then die. He also warns the explorer that he should be careful because they have no idea what can explode and where, and it's better to let things be and keep moving. The explorer agreed with him and said it was better they just ignored it when suddenly they heard a sound from the skeleton. The explorer turned his head back to see what was going on, and to his surprise, the skeleton started to overflow with bright energy. Mortem yelled to run, and we saw that there was again a huge explosion, which threw the explorer in the air. Dude just became Superman for 2 seconds. The explorer was thrown away for quite some distance. He was irritated, and he got up and claimed that it was not fair. Why did everything have to explode when he did not even touch anything? Mortem shuts him down and asks him to look at what is in front of him. The explorer could not believe what he was just witnessing, and that could be seen on his face. The path in front of him was full of glowing crystals, each of which was emitting a strong aura. The explorer was so impressed and thought if he got all this, he could spend all his life living king size. He goes near a crystal and moves his hand to take it. But as he touches the crystal, it starts glowing and sparking. The explorer was annoyed by the bizarre events happening to him in this labyrinth when, suddenly, Mortem claimed that he might know the reason behind all this. The explorer inquires about the nature of the phenomenon, and Mortem responds that it is something humans cannot perceive, but the entire maze is brimming with an intense amount of mana, which seems to be growing more potent as they delve further into it, indicating a single, ominous possibility. There could be an artifact in the heart of the dungeon that is taking over the place. He then joined the dots, the powerful and mutated lizards, the skeletons, and even the caves. Now, everything towards the heart of the dungeon is getting mutated. He further adds that it is not the end. In fact, everything that might not be part of the labyrinth is also getting affected. Even his mid-range recovery skills are not working properly, and they are being blocked. The explorer was shocked, looked at his hands, and noticed that his body did not recover automatically from the blast. According to Mortem, there's a chance that the scrolls they have to leave the dungeon may fail to work if the mana becomes too powerful, potentially obstructing their efforts to find a secure spot. It's conceivable that if they utilize the scroll, they might end up transported below ground. The explorer's expression changed as he became worried that even in the worst situation, he could not get out of this place. Mortem says that their chances are slim to none, and the only possibility he could see to get out of here is to defeat whatever is waiting for them at the end of this labyrinth, and for that, they will have to continue their journey. The explorer takes comfort in knowing that at least they had a 1% chance of getting out of there and moving forward towards the end. Soon the explorer finds himself in front of the entrance to the heart of the dungeon. He added that he thought he might have to face some more monsters before reaching here, but guess luck has not totally abandoned them. A huge gate stands before the explorer, and the explorer pushes the door to enter. On entering the dungeon's heart, he witnesses something that makes him even more worried than he already was. They have encountered an evil spirit, which is formed when the negative energy of a place gets combined with the mana of the place. As the explorer was finding words to express his emotions, Mortem asked him to see what lies in the center of the spirit. An artifact that was acting as the core of the evil spirit has manifested itself into a huge rock-like creature. With a perplexed look, the explorer was looking at the creature and trying to make sense of this when a huge rock arm crashed, which he managed to dodge. In a hurry, Mortem revealed to him that the dungeon's keeper, after fusing with the artifact, had become a major issue, as the mana had been spreading throughout the dungeon, converting everything into a ticking time bomb. Hearing this, the explorer had no option, so he charged in at the monster and said that they would only be able to leave the place if they managed to defeat it. The rocky monster fired numerous rocks at the explorer, all fused with highly concentrated mana. The explorer did not mind and kept on charging, thinking that he would bury the rocks. But suddenly they started to overflow with energy, and the explorer became worried. As the rocks came near the explorer, all of them exploded, and the explorer could not do anything besides shielding himself from getting any major injuries. Mortem tells the explorer that if he keeps at it for a long time, then his sword and his body will meet the same fate. The explorer did not understand, to which Mortem clarified that they were a ticking time bomb and would also explode if nothing was done soon. The explorer was stunned and asked Mortem what he should do in that case. But before getting an answer, we see that the monster is charging up and attacking the explorer with more rocks infused with mana, and Mortem instructs the explorer to run if he wants to live. When the explorer saw this, he was terrified. and his feet would not move as the spirit braced itself for a massive chamomile wave. Mortem shouted for him to go, but the spirit unleashed the massive chamomile wave before he could react. The explorer used his hands and the sword to defend himself as he somehow avoided the energy wave by an inch. The explorer was cornered and gritted his jaw. Determining to counter, he dashed upon the spirit and chose to strike him from the opposite side. He was determined to locate a vulnerability in the massive rock spirit's body, and these vulnerabilities were probably in the joints. One of the stones suddenly fell off as the explorer moved swiftly to strike the spirit with his sword in between the stones. This stone was thrown away by the impact, but it suddenly started to fly back towards Explorer. The stone flicked over Explorer's face after hovering in midair. The adventurer was flung back a long way before he realized what had happened. The stone's impact was so great that he was unable to even consider launching an all-out attack. Mortem advised focusing on the middle, which is the artifact's central component. He went on to say that this spirit was formed by combining with an item, and the explorer might use their skill of curse-eating to absorb the energy. The explorer was aware of this, but he was finding virtually no chance to attack. So, he aimed his ring directly at the spirit, hoping to create an opening. However, the monster saw the threat and attempted to stop the explorer from hitting the spirit by directing a powerful energy wave in the explorer's direction. The adventurer countered with his skill, Air Bullet, which was perhaps his most effective weapon. Because the two energies collided so violently, everything nearby was destroyed. As he was being forced back, the explorer asked Mortem if they would be able to defeat it. As soon as Mortem understood how powerful the opposition was, he gave the explorer the order to avoid the attack. The explorer did his best and was knocked back by the repulsion, but the spirit would not stop, continuing to fire energy blasts at him. He was becoming frustrated because he wasn't getting any breathing room and nothing was working, whether close range or distant attacks. All of this was to no use. Explorer felt enraged and dashed towards the monster, dodging all of the assaults the spirit sent at him. He closed the distance and pounced at the spirit, surprising the creature. The explorer attempted to strike the monster's core, but the monster startled him by entirely blocking access to the artifact with stones. This infuriated the explorer, but he couldn't stop there, since this was probably the closest he could get, and he tried to cut deep into the stones, pressing a button on the sword to let the lethal acid released by the blue bullets do its work. We could see blue energy and smoke within the rocks, resulting from the explorer's strike. He gasped for air, and as he considered his next move to defeat the monster, he failed to notice the massive stone hand approaching him. He was hit by the strike and sent back far away on the dungeon floor. He yelled in anguish as he lay on the floor, wondering why the air bullet hadn't worked. It was supposed to blow it apart because it was his most powerful ability. Mortem stated that skills could not be fully applied against this creature because the enormous mana emitted by the spirit weakened all skills. The explorer was struck once more with flying mana-infused rocks as he attempted to regain his footing. The explorer had to use his sword as a shield, and the spirit attacked with a massive energy wave while looking at the explorer. Mortem asked the explorer if he was okay. The explorer, frustrated, said he felt like he was going nowhere and that everything he did was pointless. But, regaining his confidence, he reflected that if he couldn't conquer an easy hurdle like this, he didn't deserve his revenge on the prince. As he was thinking about this, a massive attack came his way. Mortem instructed him to look out for it. With a determined gaze, the explorer dodged the onslaught and charged in once more. He reasoned that if his skills were not delivering results, he would use Clay's sword because it was the sole assault that dealt some harm to the spirit. He intended to continue hitting the core with his sword, which appeared challenging but was not impossible. As he headed towards his goal, he was met with another significant strike by the spirit, which he managed to block with some difficulty. The explorer was about to run out of blue bullets when the spirit noticed one and adjusted his attacking and defensive strategies. The spirit with its massive rock-like body began spinning like a Beyblade, leaving the explorer breathless, since he had never imagined such a feat was even possible. Mortem cried at him to focus on the combat as he was stunned by the spinning spirit, but it was too late since he was attacked by the spirit's massive rock arm. Its speed had grown dramatically, and the explorer could not avoid it this time. The collision was severe, and he was hurled against the dungeon wall, where he lay still. His body was severely beaten, and he had little to no vitality left. Mortem noticed this and informed him that his body had been beaten severely and that they had been battling for far too long. His body has begun to react to the demonic mana that was exposed in the dungeon, and he will soon explode. Explorer lay half dead, scarcely moving his lips. Explorer inquired as to how long he had, to which Mortem responded that it might be as little as 2 minutes depending on Explorer's condition. The explorer, with a fresh spark in his eyes, stared at the spirit and stated it would be sufficient to complete the task. The adventurer, now filled with renewed determination, rose to his feet and declared that both his body and weapon were capable of delivering just one more blow, which must be crucial under the circumstances. Furthermore, for that last attack, 1 or 2 minutes is enough for him. The explorer watched the spinning monster, and as soon as he saw an opening, he jumped towards the monster. Upon observing this, Mortem was perplexed because it was just like what they had done before. He asked the explorer if he had given up hope or what. The explorer pointed the ring towards the dungeon floor and asked Mortem to attack with an air bullet. Mortem did so, and this move was enough to confuse the monster because the explorer was now high above the core of the monster and it was not covered with rocks as of now. The monster made a valiant effort to defend the core, but it grew sluggish, leaving the top unguarded, and the explorer took advantage of this by striking it with full force. This time the explorer managed to dig halfway in, and that's enough for the explorer to make an impact. With a very worried look, he pressed the button in his sword using his last blue bullet. The blue bullet caused a huge explosion in the spirit's body, but somewhere the explorer knew that it was not enough to kill it. He was in a dire situation and was sweating. He looked at the rock with his sword dug deep into it with smoke all over. He was attempting to dig deeper, but Mortem advised him to leave the area because rocks surrounded him. The explorer could not make a decision. He wondered if he was going to go down like the lizard and the skeleton by exploding. He gained some courage and was not ready to give up. He took a blue crystal from the debris and wanted to give it one last shot. With large rocks rapidly approaching him, putting him in grave danger, the adventurer grabbed the crystal with both hands and used all his might to penetrate the hard, rocky exterior of the spirit. During this instance, this achievement led to a tremendous explosion, with the upper portion of the spirit's body being obliterated due to the blast, but it did not come free. The explosion also took a heavy toll on the explorer, who lay half dead with wounds all over his body. The explorer somehow managed to remain conscious, and to his surprise, he realized that he had broken the core's outer layer, and the artifact was now exposed. Without wasting any more time, the explorer placed his hand on the artifact and activated the skill Curse Eating. The absorption of an artifact by the explorer resulted in a tremendous upsurge of power. As soon as they finished the deed, it was time to leave, and finally, he got out. The explorer could not believe that they actually managed to live to tell the tale. He was lying on the ground in the forest with his sword broken into pieces. Now that they were no longer in the dungeon, the recovery process had started in his body, and the mutation was fully healed. He was happy to make it out of there in one piece, and he thought of checking his status as he was sure something must have improved after that huge battle. As he navigated the system, he was taken aback to discover that his curse-eating proficiency had increased by 2 levels, and his animal instinct skill had also improved, which he had thought was impossible. Suddenly he realized that Mortem was silent. The explorer did not understand what was happening. A large screen appeared out of nowhere, scaring the explorer. It said that the limit of mortem has been increased from 100 to 150, and the skill air bullet has evolved into an air burst. That was not it, 2 new skills have been unlocked. All these pop-ups were confusing the explorer, who had absolutely no idea what was happening. The explorer concluded that all these upgrades were because they were able to absorb an artifact. Additionally, a message appeared indicating that the system was activating the concealed abilities. However, these abilities can only be utilized once specific conditions are fulfilled, and the mana reserve in the ring has also noticeably grown. The system then exhibited the collection of skills that the explorer had at his disposal, but in order to activate them, he would have to spend his stored mana, and right now, he could only enable a maximum of 2 skills. The explorer was left utterly bewildered after seeing this, as he had no understanding of the purpose of these skills, and attempts to clarify were met with silence from Mortem. The explorer appreciated the convenience of being able to store mana and have the system automatically upgrade when the necessary conditions were met, as it meant he didn't have to constantly attend to it. Looking at the screen, the explorer was in a dilemma. He could not understand which skill to choose. But finally, he made up his mind and chose the skill, sacrificing a significant amount of his stored mana. After the event, the explorer went to Clay's shop and called out to him. Clay saw him and wondered if he went for dungeon hunting, as it had been only 2 days, and if he had come to stock up on some more equipment. The explorer explained that he had cleared the dungeon already, but in the process, he broke the sword. Would it be possible for Clay to repair the sword? Clay looked at the sword and could not believe the state it was in, as it was a very powerful weapon. The explorer told him that he really owed his life to the weapon, and he really wanted it to be fixed. On hearing this, Clay teared up because one of his weapons was able to save a life. He told the explorer that he would fix it and even make some more upgrades to the sword for future purposes. After learning this, the explorer was happy and provided Clay with some tools he had stumbled upon while clearing out the dungeon, giving him the freedom to make use of them however he desired. He also presents him with a substantial amount of money and urges him to create his best piece of work, holding nothing back. On seeing the tools and coins, Clay was surprised, as he had never been treated so kindly by anyone, and he assured the explorer that he would do his best. With a smile on his face, the explorer shared the news that they would be reunited shortly and said goodbye by waving his hand. He then went to the bar, and the bartender was also surprised that the explorer was able to clear the dungeon so soon. The explorer nodded and said he had some help, and he got a decent loot from the dungeon. The bartender asked him if he wanted to sell some of his goods in the black market, but the explorer replied that it could be done later and he was too tired to do business right now. The bartender gives him the go-ahead, and later ponders on his newfound might, having conquered the dungeon single-handedly. After a long time, the explorer enjoyed lying on the soft bed, which was quite relaxing. He checks his ring and questions if the upgrade is still being carried out, as he hasn't heard back from Mortem. The ring lit up all of a sudden, and Mortem materialized, appearing noticeably more formidable and intimidating. The explorer, Stetch, looked at Mortem and asked did the upgrade has finished. Sure enough, the big guy's story checked out when the monster tangled with Stetch. The Mortem reboot left him with limited abilities, except for his air bullet technique, which has seriously upgraded into an air explosion. That's Stetch's secret weapon now. Stetch pondered over Mortem's words, contemplating the notion that his appearance alone had undergone a transformation. The enigmatic skill known as the Aura of Curses would soon be at his command, once he had mastered it. Mortem would elucidate further on this mysterious ability when they delved into the next dungeon. After retrieving the weapon from Clay, they would proceed to the next labyrinthine challenge. However, for now, Stetch yearned for nothing more than to rest. A sudden and powerful knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. As Stetch emerges from his repose, he hears a chorus of shouts from behind the closed door. Dalton's voice, resonant and commanding, calls out for Clay. The two men descend to the ground floor, their footfalls heavy on the stairs. Stetch, with a hushed tone, inquires of Clay's whereabouts and the cause of his distress. Clay, bruised and struggling to breathe, had been discovered by a passerby in the alley, unconscious and near death. The resonant clink of glass against glass filled the air as Dalton uncorked his precious draught in the dimly lit hall. The deep crimson elixir flowed like a river of life, as Dalton, with a surgeon's precision, administered it to Clay's unconscious form. "He's been hurt," Stetch exclaimed, but Dalton, a master of his craft, remained unfazed. Clay's eyelids fluttered open, and in a barely audible whisper, he asked about the cost of the miraculous potion. Dalton, with a solemn expression, answered, "It is not cheap, but what better time to use it than in a time of dire need?" Clay, rising to his feet, found himself enveloped in a haze of confusion, unable to discern his surroundings or recall the precise sequence of events that had led him to this moment. Yet, as if emerging from the shadows of his memory, the spectre of Derek loomed large. Then, he caught a glimpse of one of his assailants, a face he recognized all too well. "It's him again," Dalton muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Who is this despicable character?" Clay inquired, his curiosity piqued. "A troublemaker, to be sure," Dalton replied. "But he never stepped over the line, not until the day he disgraced himself in front of everyone. It was then that I took it upon myself to teach him a lesson. And it seems that lesson has served me well, for I have been keeping a close eye on you ever since." Clay disclosed that those ruffians had snatched the cash from Stetch and issued a menacing proclamation, insisting that they would not be pacified until the enigmatic figure was captured. Stetch became visibly distressed and enraged, swearing to take matters into his own hands and demanding that Clay hand over the weapon immediately. Stetch recommended dispatching a delegate to Clay's atelier and, having draped himself in a cloak, guaranteed his swift return. It's pitch black outside, and Stetch finally decides to stretch his limbs while Mortem looks on. Stetch remarks that a mere fight won't tear them apart, and Mortem chuckles, finding it intriguing. Stetch then straightens his arm, tapping into his animal instincts as a conversation unfolds in the village pass. The fellow is trying to divert the guards' attention, but they ask him to keep it down, explaining that it's not a good time to visit the Dalton residence due to a recent complaint. Derek is quite miffed that they won't let him in, so his mates inquire about the guards' response. He suggests they return in the morning, given the late hour. One of the lads then chimes in, "We've got to make a living, and we need to act fast. It's not just about the money, though." Hey there, Derek isn't familiar with Stetch or his line of work, but let me tell you, if you manage to catch him, you're in for a treat. The folks who know him say he's just like the guy on the flyers. Derek mentioned that they were trying to track him down, and then voila! Stetch showed up out of the blue. It's been a while since Stetch has had a scrap, but sometimes, fate just has a way of stepping in. "Well, aren't you a bold one?" one of the troublemakers said as he reached for Stetch, but to his surprise, his hand slipped right off. Stetch was left wondering if some kind of magic was at play here. In the next moment, Stetch threw a punch that landed hard, sending the bully crashing to the ground. Stetch's hands moved so quickly, it was as if they were moving faster than the speed of light. The other bully quickly whipped out a knife and charged towards Stetch, causing the ground to tremble beneath their feet. Stetch leapt into the air and landed a solid knee to the second bully's face, causing the knife to go flying and the bully to crumple to the side with a busted up mug. Derek yells that Stetch is just a pawn to be used and takes a fighting stance. But Stetch skillfully dodges his attacks and retaliates with a punch to the chin, leaving Derek drooling. Stetch is determined to bring these guys to justice, so he flips Derek over and slams him hard onto the ground. "Gee, I can't believe they only gave him 400 crowns, huh? One of the rowdy guys gave you the okay to rest on the ground," Stetch said with a hint of disappointment. He grabbed the same bottle of potion he snagged from Dalton at the bar earlier, but it didn't seem to help. It's outrageous that they would even think of laying a hand on someone they shouldn't be messing with. Stetch started pouring the potion on Derek's face to heal him and teach them a lesson. Good morning. You'll be delighted to find a tasty breakfast waiting for you, and there's plenty of lively chatter going on about the exciting events happening tonight. Oh, and apparently Derek was spotted earlier looking a bit disheveled and wandering the streets, which has everyone talking. By the way, has it to do anything with Stetch? Stetch chuckled as he mentioned that he was just getting started, when all of a sudden Clay walked into the bar. Not only did he manage to control the weapon, but he also made it even more powerful. With a wedge-shaped modification, this sword is definitely not like the ones that ordinary swordsmen carry. Dalton then spoke up about the capsules and said that they require a special kind of gas to use. And guess how many gnomes know how to handle it? Just a handful. Clay put together a list of components and added descriptions, so that if experts were to examine it, they could develop new items. He and the others checked out Stetch and were impressed by his stylish appearance. Stetch expressed his gratitude to the group and mentioned that the sword would be extremely beneficial to him. Clay proposed a name for the unique weapon, as no one else in the world possessed one like it. Hey there. As soon as Stetch starts tossing around different names in his mind, Mortem chimes in with a brilliant idea. Excitedly, Stetch declares that he'll name his sword Penetrator, and just like that, it's settled. With a proud flourish, Stetch raises his sword high and welcomes our heroes, Brandon, Castle, Harold, and Ballstock, back to the Kingdom of Venice on horseback. Harold feels a bit jittery and fastens the top button of his shirt. He takes a seat and takes a moment to relax, holding his stress ball in one hand. Suddenly, a knock on the door echoes through the hallway. Who could that be? Harold wonders aloud, rubbing his temple with one hand and wearing a bit of a grumpy expression. Turns out, it's Alfred, the second son of the ruler. Hey, it's been a while since we last saw our brother, right? How's Harold been doing? He mentioned that things was okay, but I'm not so sure. I think it's important to remind Harold about what happened when they went to that dungeon without the king's permission. If our dad finds out, there might be some consequences. Harold came to the realization that he had made a mistake, and he was feeling quite disappointed. Alfred kindly requested that he keep quiet about the situation and assured him that he would think of an excuse for Harold. He instructed Harold to simply agree and take this information with him when he headed to the audience hall. There, Harold was warmly introduced as the third son of the king and a loyal servant, to which the king exclaimed, "Long time no see," as he greeted him. Here's the 11th king of Venice. He mentioned that Harold had been keeping himself quite occupied for the past couple of weeks. Harold replied in a subdued tone, "Yes, that's true." Alfred, quick to defend his brother, chimed in. As soon as he learned about the elves' rebellion and the resistance in the southwest, he rushed to take action. Idril Henrietta, the first prince's assistant, mentioned that she wasn't aware of any armed elf rebellion. She then started asking the prince lots of questions. Alfred shared that his servant, Conrad, owns a crystal ball that helped them see the rebellion. They quickly informed Harold about it. Apparently, the elves were trying to get into the top-secret Dungeon A to get their hands on some powerful artifacts. If Harold hadn't acted so fast, things would have taken a turn for the worse. Idle wondered aloud, "Don't they want to admit that everything we did was for nothing?" King Alfred inquired. Harold responded, speaking with a hint of sadness, "I'm afraid I lost my comrades, except for Captain Ballstock. However, I did manage to destroy the artifact." The king asked once more, "And what about the herald?" The herald spoke up, explaining that he had been infected, and so he thought it best to destroy himself while he was still in enemy hands. Alfred interjected, "But Harold, he brought us the head of their leader as proof." With a triumphant grin, Harold displayed the head of the mysterious being and declared, "The king is pleased with this elf, so I guess that means you're off the hook, Harold. Go ahead and take a break." Harold grinned back, got up from the ground, and made his way towards the exit. Before he could leave, Alfred whispered in his ear, "You're in my debt now, Harold." Harold paused, hearing this, and left the hall with a slight frown. We find ourselves in a lush, vibrant forest. Let's cook up some delicious stir-fried fish over the fire to enjoy while we're here. Mortem, did you notice how there are fewer and fewer signs of people as we head southwest? Stetch mentioned that's because of the elves who live nearby. Not too far from here, there's a forest that's home to the last and largest elf settlement. They're not too fond of visitors, so they prefer to keep to themselves. Nonetheless, this place is truly amazing. According to Mortem, this is the perfect place to utilize your skills without drawing attention. Stetch is quietly gathering water from the river, but he thinks it's premature to get excited just yet. There have been whispers going around that the elves in this area can be hazardous. Suddenly, you hear rustling in the bushes and the sound of someone sprinting through the forest. The poor guy shouts for help as he darts between the trees, trying to escape an arrow that the elves have shot at him from the shrubbery. Oh dear, this poor guy has ended up in a bit of a predicament. He's lying on the ground, smack dab in the middle of the road. I'm sure he's realizing that he's in a bit of hot water now. As he desperately crawls towards the elves, he hopes for mercy. Thankfully, the girl in the hood speaks up just in time, shouting for the elves to spare his life. They call this place Stetch, located in the southwestern forest, also known as the Dark Forest. It's such a mysterious place that even search engines can't find any information about it. The thick foliage makes it impossible to see the sky, and the map is useless since you can't tell which way is north. Hey there, Stetch. As he kept on walking, he stumbled upon something unusual. There's a fella tied to a tree right in the heart of the forest. Hey, buddy, wake up! Stetch exclaimed, pouring water from an eggplant over his head. Mortem then urged Stetch to leave the place soon, or else he might end up playing in the water with some wild spirits. Stetch became quite intrigued. Was he going to save this man? Suddenly, he noticed a human hand floating in the water, with a bone sticking out of it. Not exactly the most thrilling sight, huh? So, Stetch decided to aim the artifact at the water and set off an air explosion. He wanted to take on those spirits head-on. The water splashed everywhere, and Stetch quickly carried the man across the land. Once they were a safe distance away, he noticed that the water was still scattered around them. He realized that they couldn't just leave things like this, since the spirits were made of water and wouldn't be able to withstand an air attack. That's when they decided to use the arc skill, and a bolt of lightning struck the target. It looks like Stetch's artifact has started a chain reaction. The stun effect should hit a maximum of 5 enemies, giving us a chance to catch our breath. And just like that, the water disappeared, and Stetch started chowing down on some curse-eating treats. We decided to hide in a thicket, hoping no one would find us. Suddenly, we heard a loud scream. Turns out, it was a lost traveler who was grateful for Stetch's help. Stetch gently urged him to take a deep breath and share what had occurred. The man then started to explain that in the shadowy forest, there are extraordinary beings like elves, to which Stetch replied with a friendly grin, asking how this fellow had come to be in such a place. The man then revealed that they were on their way to the capital with a time-sensitive delivery, and had no choice but to take a shortcut through the dark forest. So, those dismembered limbs belonged to his travel companions, Stetch realized. The elves had left the guy in a sour mood after dragging him into that pond, he explained with a frown. However, Stetch was determined not to leave him behind and suggested they head towards the road that would take them out of the forest. The guy was thrilled and thanked Stetch profusely. Using his animal instinct, Stetch signaled that the exit was in the direction of the most prominent sounds. And so, they trekked through the forest, on the lookout for that road. No sooner had they found him than Stetch gently suggested that the gentleman relocate for his own safety. As the man began to walk away, Stetch sensed that something wasn't right. To protect themselves, he drew a weapon. The poor fellow was likely quite frightened by Stetch's swift response. Stetch expertly warded off the incoming arrows with a swift movement. He then called out to the bushes, asking whoever was hiding to come out calmly. To their astonishment, a young girl emerged from the shrubbery. With one side of her face hidden by her robe, she approached the guys steadily. Stetch remained on high alert, shielding his friend. "Hand it over," the girl demanded, accompanied by 2 other armed companions. Stetch declared that he wouldn't obey her commands. The 2 partners were already on edge, prepared for a fight. The girl cautioned that she wouldn't repeat her warning. "If they wanted a fight, then they should make the first move," Stetch retorted. Mortem chuckled to himself, thinking about how Stetch would have thrown in the towel a long time ago if it weren't for him. One of the girl's partners was on the verge of losing it and wanted to hurt Stetch, but she chose to handle the situation peacefully and wanted to have a chat with the guys instead. Stetch was on edge, not knowing what was going on. She was fed up with being constantly misunderstood, so she told everyone to be quiet and started to slowly approach Stetch. She suggested sharing why they wanted that man to be handed over to them. Stetch eagerly wanted to inform him as soon as the man began to speak up. He requested him not to interrupt until she finishes explaining. She is curious to know what exactly the man shared with Stetch. She wonders what silly things the man was shouting in the forest. He seemed quite anxious and held on to Stetch tightly, hiding behind him. She warmly waved them over and excitedly shared that she had something fascinating to show Stetch. As they followed the elf, they came across an overturned carriage. Stetch couldn't help but gaze in wonder, puzzled by the situation. The cart was facing a completely different direction than what the man had described. If they were trying to escape into the dark forest to avoid an attack, the tracks should have led in the opposite direction. However, these traces were leading them outward instead. The young lady was eager to share something special with the gentleman. He felt a little nervous, trying to guess what she might show him next. As they continued on their journey, she cautiously led him down the mountain, despite Stetch's warning about the risk near the water. She seemed fearless, as if they owned the place. The second thing she revealed was a collection of human limbs, and with a curious smile, she asked if this man considered the bodies to be his friends. "Hey there, if you understand what those labels mean, feel free to share." Stetch the elf is feeling a bit miffed because he feels like he was tricked by that merchant. When Stetch showed him his label, it turned out that it marked him as a slave trader. So, the merchant asked Stetch why he trusted those elves with pointed ears over him. Stetch gave the guy a quick jab to the head. He had asked him to quiet down, after all. Since Stetch is so sharp, there was no need for him to keep secrets. The guy started rambling about something else, mumbling about how Stetch didn't have his back. The girl then turned to Stetch and asked how he planned to handle the situation. Stetch clenched his fist, ready for action, while Elf tensed up just a bit, sensing the tension in the air. The guy slowly got up from where he was lying. Stetch took a deep breath and glanced at where the blow had come from. He then decided to make a hasty retreat from the group of guys. As he was running, they fired arrows at him with their bows. One of the arrows, shot by the elf girl with a flick of her wrist, struck him in a sensitive spot. He tumbled to the ground, howling in agony. Stetch couldn't believe how accurately she had hit a moving target, and in such a sensitive spot. The guy on the ground, writhing in pain, begged for mercy and swore never to cross her path again if she let him live. He pledged to make things better. The guy yelled out to Stetch, assuring him that he would carry out any request Stetch had for him. As the elf drew near and pointed her bow straight at the guy, ready to take action, the sound of an arrow soaring through the air made everyone jump. But to their surprise, it landed in the stream nearby. The elf, after shaking the water off her arrow, shared that they were still on the same team and that she believed Stetch would choose to defend the guy. Stetch explained to her that he struggles to keep his anger in check, so preventing the elf's attack wouldn't be wise. The elf had set her sights on Stetch and aimed to make him understand why she needed to eliminate anyone who entered this place. Stetch shared that folks in Venice think elves are quite hazardous. Just as the arrow was about to hit Stetch, he assured her that he didn't come here to quarrel and wouldn't stand around waiting for a sneak attack. With a friendly smile, you'll never guess what Stetch did. He quietly plucked the arrow right out of the air, using some sort of enchantment to make it land safely in the ground. The poor elf was completely baffled, she couldn't believe her eyes. It then dawned on her that Stetch might just be a magician, even though he didn't look like one at all. Absolutely fascinating. Upon observing a ring, the elf was convinced that it was the same enchanted item that her compatriots had refused to acknowledge as a magical entity. They had confided in one another that Stetch was not endowed with magical powers, insisting that he was devoid of any sorcerous capabilities. The elfin girl directed her warriors to compel Stetch to utilize all of his mana through his magical item. The elves made way and commenced to fire arrows towards Stetch, who was already subjected to a volley of missiles. Nevertheless, Stetch triggered his explosive shot skill. He causes the fire to strike a single target while enhancing the projectile's effectiveness, and then activates Crosswind, causing the arrows to fly past the elves in terror. They couldn't believe that Stetch possessed magic until the arrows embedded themselves in a tree. Stetch then inquired why they had accused him of using magic if they were still hoping for such a result. The girl tensed the string of her bow and declared that they never take a life without justification. Mortem warned Stetch not to utilize his magical abilities any further, as he had already reached the maximum limit of 125 out of 150. At that instant, Stetch started to unsheath his sword. With his sword, he deflected the arrow that was aimed at his head, a task that he found to be relatively effortless, given the elf's tendency to aim for that specific target. Despite the fact that it was pointless for Stetch to defend himself, if he were to retaliate, the elf would likely lose an arm or a leg in the process. Whoa, things are getting intense. The blast was so powerful that the cobblestones went flying every which way. One of the brave fighters managed to retreat and survive. He quickly warned Lady Elena to be cautious. In a flash, Stetch stepped in, sneaking up on the fighter without being noticed. With one swift kick to the head, the fighter was sent flying several meters away. Amazed, Lady Elena realized that combining different types of magic with an ordinary object just isn't feasible. She exclaimed, "Perhaps this ring is an artifact." Stetch grinned and held up the ring, explaining that he had acquired it himself. Elena couldn't believe her eyes when she saw it and whispered to herself, "Can it be true? A cursed ring from a deceased man?" Despite the hail of arrows, Stetch skillfully dodged them, but the lady continued to relentlessly target him. She shouted, "How awful and repugnant." It looked like Stetch was having a tough time understanding what his friend was mumbling about. She seemed to be speaking negatively about them. Mortem then shared that she was planning to cast a curse, which made Stetch so scared that he took off running. But just as he was starting to feel safe, their mistress suddenly appeared out of nowhere and was now very close to Stetch. Stetch was feeling quite jittery when he noticed the lady's happiness with him. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed, and an arrow whizzed by, striking the woman. Ouch, that must have hurt. Poor Stetch was hit right in the chest and was in a lot of pain. He was so shocked that he plopped down on the ground, not knowing what to do. After a while, he remembered he had a healing ability, so he used it. His strength came back, and his wounds closed up on their own. The lady was amazed when she saw Stetch all better. Wow, look at that. The arrow shot out of Stetch's body, and his wound started to heal right away. But before he could catch his breath, his mistress fired off another arrow. Poor Stetch tried to defend himself, but more arrows struck him, one in his hand, the other in his belt. Ouch. At least his elf healing powers kicked in again. And his mistress even complimented him on his useful skill. Stetch attempted to shoot at the mistress, but if he missed, it would be risky. Upon seeing this, the lady launched another arrow, causing a powerful explosion. The blast was so strong that it scattered the surrounding area. Stetch was shocked to discover that a single arrow had thwarted his attack. Mortem explained to him that if he hit an unfinished magical projectile, he could use the skill of dispersing magical power to destroy it. He also mentioned that the core resembles dust and is devoid of color, making it difficult to comprehend the circumstances quickly with just a single swift strike. The elf demonstrated that she was not as simple as she seemed by skillfully evading Stetch's attack, causing him to fall to the ground. At that point, Stetch activated the magic of his sword by pressing a button on it. The cobblestones were strewn all around the site, startled the elf, as she hadn't expected Stetch to possess any weapons. Stetch advanced toward his mistress, intending to strike her, but she responded by firing arrows at him without any intention of backing down. Stetch then activated Crosswind, causing the arrows to miss him as they deviated from their course. With the wind at her disposal, she could easily decapitate him once she got close enough. She moved even closer to Stetch, taking aim directly at him from such a short distance. As soon as he fires his ring, she plans to neutralize his expertise. The lady quickly took aim at his head, anticipating an assault. However, Stetch, without hesitation, had his ring-adorned fist pointed at her for a considerable time, preparing to strike first. The force of his powerful attack sent Elena flying backwards several meters. Despite the elves' agility, Stetch declared that they cannot evade attacks in the air, and there is nothing that can be done to change that. He managed to overpower Elena, grabbing her by the collar to prevent her from fleeing. He warned her that even intense emotions can pose issues. He held her firmly and stared deeply into her eyes, having encountered a formidable opponent in fencing for the first time. Elena exclaimed, "What's going on here?" Startled, Stetch turned around to see Elena bound and gagged. Elena was curious about why Stetch had ventured into this forest, guessing that he might have had ill intentions towards his own kind. But Stetch assured her that he had no such plans and was not looking for a fight. However, he warned her that there would be consequences for trying to get rid of him. Elena grew nervous and anxious, but Stetch reassured her that everything would be okay. There was a spread of delicious food on the ground for them to enjoy. Stetch removed everything from his backpack and assured them that he continued to be kind to them, even though he had initially feared for his life. Elena thought that was sufficient, but Stetch still seemed surprised. He then examined the map and informed them that there were 3 dungeons in the forest. Before leaving, he made sure to take all of his belongings, including the forest map. As a friendly gesture, he promised to return the map if they ever crossed paths again. Elena attempted to caution Stetch about something important before he left. Oh dear. Stetch didn't heed Elena's advice and went into the forest searching for a dungeon. When Elena yelled for him to come back, he had already wandered off. Upon looking at his map, Stetch realized his mistake. He had been walking in circles, even though the dungeon entrance was located under a tree. Once he entered the dungeon, he discovered that it was more complicated than he had initially thought, thanks to the magic that caused the tree to grow there. As he delved deeper, everything around him seemed like a new and unusual phenomenon. It was his first time there, after all. Stetch came across a plant that had sprouted right inside a dungeon. He reached out to touch the wall and activated his Pathfinder skill, but since he wasn't familiar with this type of dungeon, the skill didn't work. After pondering for a while, he managed to find a solution and grabbed a sword. Then, he started using his animal instinct skill. Mortem gained insight into the fact that he was attempting to find a route through the aftermath of the sword's clash, which was similar to visualizing sound. This piqued his curiosity, and he questioned Stetch about the age at which he began his dungeon expeditions. Stetch revealed that he had decided to pursue his interests and avoid going hungry since he was 12 years old, which necessitated his inventiveness. As they had already delved deeper into the dungeon, they were expecting to hear some noise, but it was strangely silent, and they had not yet detected any signs of a monster's presence. After walking a greater distance, Stetch was shocked to find the monster. Its appearance was nothing but a grotesque mass of roots. Stetch remained dumbfounded, finding himself in a situation he had never encountered before. As he moved, the roots around him sensed his presence and regarded him as a threat. Therefore, he proceeded cautiously to avoid them. Nevertheless, Stetch was one of the few brave hunters who dared to pursue such creatures, so he took risks and did not back down. the wicked red roots started to encircle him, and as he tried to escape by moving swiftly to avoid getting tangled, he noticed that the number of roots was increasing. Stetch became worried because there were so many of them. In an attempt to free himself, he began to cut the roots into pieces using his sword. However, they kept appearing out of nowhere, and eventually, they started to surround him from behind. The roots began to wrap around him from all sides, covering him completely, and they even started to penetrate his hands. His grave mistake was touching them. Stetch felt the roots beginning to draw his blood, but he was not overly distressed because he had now discovered that the monster fed on the blood of living creatures. After a while, Stetch observed that the roots had moved closer together, at which point he decided to use his crosswind skill. A magical force then surrounded the roots from every direction, causing them to disperse in all directions. This allowed Stetch to escape, although he sustained injuries to his hands from the roof tiles that were still bleeding. He quickly healed his arm and considered his next move, deciding to try something more drastic this time. According to Stetch, the tree is incapable of enduring his fireball technique, which consists of hurling a blazing projectile that sets ablaze all objects in its path and amplifies his energy to launch harder shots. The aftermath is incredibly impressive, as everything becomes enveloped in flames. Upon witnessing this, Stetch is taken aback by the remarkable outcome. Mortem then advises Stetch to harness all the magical power. Stetch was extremely pleased that he had effortlessly conquered the daunting task. All of a sudden, a loud crash echoed from the dungeon's entrance, causing dust to rise nearby. After catching his breath from the challenging assignment, Stetch stealthily glanced back at the tree to ensure no one was observing him. He then contemplated his abilities, realizing that he still had numerous hidden talents that he couldn't access due to his limited magic power. Just then, Elena emerged from behind, catching Stetch off guard. Stetch responded with a bright and speedy move, brandishing his sword in Elena's direction, and with a soft, amiable tone, he positioned the sword near her throat. "What brings you here?" he inquired. Elena responded that she didn't come to fight, and Stetch, with a friendly smile, started to sheath his sword, pledging to give back the card once he was done with his work. However, Elena didn't require the card, and she requested him to return only one thing, pleasantly. Stetch kindly inquired about which item his friend wanted him to bring back. With a smile, she replied that she would like the medallion. Stetch then reached into his backpack, pulled out the medallion, and asked if it was the one she was referring to. As soon as Lady Elena laid eyes on it, she appeared to be overjoyed, and the other elves rushed up, concerned about her well-being. One of the elves noticed the medallion in Stetch's hand and breathed a sigh of relief. "Geez, what a whirlwind! You found yourself in a bit of a pickle there, didn't you?" Before you knew it, voices were raised, and those elves got a little too close for comfort. But not to worry, the mistress took care of it by giving them a gentle nudge to steer them clear of her path. She seemed quite focused on the medallion and decided to join Stetch. "How about we all take a moment to chill and figure out what's going on here?" Stetch was a bit confused about what to expect from the lady in this situation. Mortem was also left scratching his head, trying to make sense of things. Once again, the woman got down on her knees and requested that Stetch return the medallion to her. She was more than willing to comply with whatever Stetch asked of her. Stetch proposed a hypothetical scenario where he turned out to be a baddie, and she wasn't sure what he would command her to do. However, Elena had her doubts about Stetch being a villain, especially after that one time when he spared the life of someone who had done wrong. Elaine didn't believe Stetch was a wicked person, he was merely unaware of the medallion's value to her. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Finally, he chose to return it to Elaine, but it wasn't a straightforward matter. He had one stipulation, and Elaine felt a flutter of worry, unsure of what it could be. She remembered her pledge to go above and beyond for the medallion and pressed him to share his condition. Stetch shared with Elena that he's planning to tear down the whole dungeon in the forest he mentioned before. Elena was taken aback and found it hard to believe. She stared at him in disbelief, but Stetch was determined and explained that he really needed her help. Despite the tough request, Stetch remained hopeful that Elena would lend a hand, knowing how much the medallion meant to her. She didn't really want to go with him, but she didn't have much of a choice. Elena's help was the only way for her to avoid those pesky elves. Even if they did show up, she'd just have to cover for him. He was ready for her to say anything about him, as long as she agreed to come along. It was a tough decision, but she couldn't shake the thought of how much she needed that medallion. Hi. So, here's the scoop. Elena's buddy left a little note in their pal's hand, saying that she needed to take off for a few days. She asked the elder to share that she had embarked on a reconnaissance mission while they were out exploring. While they were walking, Elena's mind started to wander, reminiscing about her happy childhood memories. Being in the forest was second nature to her, as she grew up there, and she couldn't help but think about her loving grandmother who raised her. Her grandmother shared so many interesting stories about people with her. According to her, folks could be quite selfish and would go to great lengths for their own gain. But this guy she was with, he was different. As she followed him and observed him closely, she couldn't help but think that he was a kind-hearted soul. They kept on walking, each lost in their own thoughts, until the poor guy turned as white as a ghost and started having trouble breathing. A sense of worry and shivers ran through his body, and he started to think that maybe he had made a mistake. So, he decided to say sorry for making her come with him, even though she didn't know if he was a good person or not. The reason he wanted to explore the forest's dungeon was still unclear to Elena, and it seemed like it had nothing to do with him but rather with the objects and artifacts. Stetch felt a bit awkward because of her questions. He wasn't sure how to respond to her, so the guy thought it'd be best to keep quiet about the whole thing. It was a bit of a letdown for her, as she had been eagerly waiting for an answer for 4 long days. But finally, they made it to the dungeon. Although the entrance was cleverly concealed, it wasn't too hard to find once they knew where to look. Stetch kept on making his way down into the bottomless pit. Everything was going smoothly until he suddenly heard some noises nearby. When he turned around, he spotted some bugs and without any delay, the brave guy started to battle them. It was a piece of cake for him to conquer the insect monsters, and he kept on fighting them fearlessly and courageously. All he had to do was break their joints to defeat those giant ants. Elena was feeling so concerned for that guy as he battled his opponents. Her gentle heart just couldn't bear to watch it calmly. She was extremely worried about him, and the poor thing was feeling so anxious that she couldn't find a spot to settle down. Suddenly, a huge ant started crawling towards her, and the sound it made was absolutely terrifying. The monster was ready to pounce and attack. The girl may have looked delicate and harmless, but she was a force to be reckoned with. When the giant ant attacked, she was ready for it. She fought bravely, using her sickle to defend herself. Though she managed to defeat the first ant, she soon realized that the battle was far from over. A second, even larger ant appeared, ready to take on Elena and prove to be a much more formidable opponent. He was definitely not happy when he spotted them, and his anger only intensified as he stared them down. He opened his mouth, ready to unleash his fury and destroy them all. Just then, a group of giant ants with bright red eyes emerged, looking incredibly angry themselves. Stetch told the girl to stay close to him and conjured up a fireball, preparing to launch it at the ants. This only served to enrage them further, but Stetch remained calm and confident, ready to face the angry insects head-on. With a sense of satisfaction, he hurled that fireball straight at the ants, which only made them more upset. They were scrambling around in a frenzy, unsure of what to do next. Lady Elena was taken aback by the intensity of his attack, realizing that his previous skirmishes with her were nothing compared to this. They both watched in awe as everything burned to the ground, mercilessly consumed by the flames. The ants tried to escape, hoping for a chance to survive, but the guy couldn't comprehend the purpose of their senseless deaths. Elena shared with him the reason behind their actions, leaving him pleasantly surprised. Intrigued by the girl's curiosity about the armor's strength, Stetch decided to put it to the test. With a multitude of questions about the artifacts, The young lady piqued his interest in the magical and energy-controlling aspects. The unusual appearance of the artifact had Elena captivated, and he was more than happy to demonstrate its abilities once again. Stetch took the time to thoroughly share with the young lady all about his fascinating artifact. However, she seemed a bit skeptical and unsure about what he was saying, which made him feel a tiny bit hurt. Nevertheless, in order to avoid any further awkwardness, she proposed that they continue on their journey. After walking for a while, Stetch started to wonder if he could truly trust this girl. As they ventured deeper into their surroundings, he couldn't help but feel increasingly anxious. To ease his worries, he decided to utilize his special abilities and clear out the dungeon they were in. After a bit of time, he finally managed to do it, and when he opened his eyes, he couldn't believe what he saw. A whole crowd of angry ants was waiting for them, making them quite anxious. They assumed they had left their troubles behind, but alas, that was not the case. It was difficult to estimate how many more ants there were, so sweet Elena proposed counting them by their noises. However, they quickly realized that this dungeon had a complex structure, unlike anything they had ever encountered before. The fellow thought that there were an excessive number of ants in the dungeon, which made it hard for him to create an accurate diagram. The girl then informed him that this dungeon was too challenging, and no one had been able to finish it yet. He wasn't sure what to do, but then Stetch heard some odd noises behind them. He asked the girl to hide, but after looking around, she realized that there wasn't any place to conceal themselves in the dungeon. So, she decided to jump on it. He was initially startled, but soon he gently requested for some peace and quiet since they could hear some eerie sounds from the deep. Before they knew it, these enormous, frightening creatures were making their way towards them. However, the creatures didn't seem to notice our friends at all. It turned out that our friends had put on some amazing camouflage cloaks, making them invisible to the monsters. When they spoke with Mortem, they understood that they needed to find a quick escape. Mortem had the idea of using ants to locate the queen. He put this plan into action as soon as the ants showed up. However, the guy using this method started to have second thoughts. After all, this dungeon has been around for a while, and he can't believe no one else has tried this before. He and his companions wondered if the elves might have already cleaned out the cave if this technique worked. Stetch kept sharing his musings and suggestions about the situation. He encouraged us to simply take action, so we did. Suddenly, there was a huge explosion in the dungeon. It turns out Stetch used his fireball once more. Right after that, he whipped out a nifty camouflage cloak. Mortem's friend inquired if this was the approach he had mentioned earlier, only to be told that they were still quite far from it. They resumed their journey, but soon enough, the ants reappeared. The guy fearlessly took them on, and Elena, noticing the situation, pulled out her bow and joined in to assist him. Every time she hit a mark, the tension grew, but they didn't back down and kept on fighting. Despite the never-ending stream of monsters, they refused to give up and battle till the very end. With a little more oomph from our friend, they were able to fend off their attackers. The area was crawling with ants, which wasn't exactly the most pleasant experience for our guy. As they caught their breath, Stetch carried on his conversation with Mortem, making sure they had all their ducks in a row. It was as if he could feel a sense of approval from someone nearby. They resumed their trek, and soon enough, Elena announced that they were nearly there. Look at this beautiful bracelet she was holding. The guy was really intrigued by it, but then, oh no, she accidentally dropped it. It's probably because of those mischievous elves. And it seems like everything here once belonged to those who lost their lives in this dungeon. The Mortem suggested that the guy keep these items, as they could come in handy for his cursed aura. The fellow found the suggestion a bit puzzling, as it involved using powerful cursed items. After giving it some thought, he asked Elena if he could return them, since no one else seemed to have a use for them. However, she wasn't too thrilled about the idea, as she was worried about the potential danger of these objects. To put her mind at ease, he explained that he had a protective artifact and that she shouldn't worry. Well, That didn't quite hit the spot for her, but she encouraged him to go ahead and do his thing. So, Stetch gathered up everything and decided to put on the bracelet himself. He suggested they move on, and when they arrived at their destination, the man they were meeting noticed the monster. He assumed that this creature was the guardian, and all the ants nearby grew cautious and started staring at Stetch and Elena. The girl thought it would be best to act fast and quickly grabbed her bow. Before they knew it, ants had started attacking and the girl ended up getting a small wound. Suddenly, the larvae around them started to wriggle and make odd noises. They looked around, feeling quite startled. To their surprise, monstrous creatures started emerging from those very larvae. The group couldn't help but feel a bit anxious as they watched this unfold, wondering what would happen next. Wow, this sight wasn't exactly a treat to look at, it was pretty gross. When Elena turned around, she noticed that another swarm of those ants was making its way towards them. There were just so many of them. They were crawling out of every single crack. Stetch was absolutely terrified and didn't know what to do. Ants were surrounding him from all sides. He realized that it was high time to put an end to this and destroy the nest. He again used his fireball. The ants did not like this very much, but they did not give up and continued to fight Stetch, hoping that they could now easily attack. The queen was very disappointed when he saw that the ants had already grown up. Elena chimed in, saying she'd take care of those in the back, but Stetch couldn't help but feel like it was overkill. He kindly requested that she move aside and then swiftly took care of the pesky ants using his special abilities. Together, they managed to eliminate all of the soldier ants, and now it's time to focus on the ones guarding the queen. He approached them with determination and a serious expression, while around him, the ants and their broken eggs were smoldering. With a mischievous grin on his face, he was ready for the next challenge. Stetch was contemplating what he would give up for his newfound ability, the awareness of cursed objects. The whole room was buzzing with the news of the dangerous cursed objects, which no one dared touch except for the researcher. However, there was one power of the artifact that could neutralize the cursed objects. Stetch was deep in thought, trying to decide what to do. He asked Elena to stay out of it to keep her safe. In the end, he decided to activate the aura of the curse. It's working and spreading like wildfire. This action even reached the queen. Poor soldier ants couldn't save her. Stetch is watching it all unfold and feeling quite bummed out, unsure of what force he unleashed and if he made the right call. Mortem reassured Elena that everything was in order and functioning as intended. However, when Stetch motioned towards her, Elena felt a wave of fear wash over her as she had no idea what was about to happen. It wasn't easy for Stetch to keep the queen under control for long, so he kindly asked Elena to step in and finish the task. At that moment, Elena clenched her bow with determination and anger in her eyes, ready to complete the task at hand. This is how she chose to get back at them for what they did to her dear brothers. Can you believe it? The queen was leading the charge, delivering the most crushing blows. It's no wonder the ants were feeling pretty miffed after all that commotion. As for Elena and Stetch, they weren't backing down anytime soon. The poor guy tried to shield Elena and told her to cover her ears and stay put. Once again, he tapped into his power, but this time, it was different. Stetch couldn't help but flash a goofy grin, feeling confident about his chances. Meanwhile, Elena found herself both reaching for her arrows and taken aback by the unexpected appearance of this quirky individual named Stetch. Poor guy, he seemed to be at a loss for words. With a friendly gesture, he placed his hand on his chest, and voila! The artifact's magic became even stronger. Stetch was thrilled to bits after they had successfully cleared the second dungeon and gotten rid of those awful beasts. They took a short break for 3 days, and then they were off to their final destination, the Mahogany Dungeon. The forest's oldest and harshest prison. Stetch was confident that he had significantly improved his strength, but Mortem questioned his claim. Elena suggested that this time, the peril would come from the elves, not the animals. The elves resided near the Mahogany Dungeon, making it challenging for them to go unnoticed by the elves again. Elena has instructed Stetch to obey her and pay attention to her. However, he is still confused about the situation in the forest. They stumbled upon what seemed to be an animal's track, possibly a deer's, but it turned out to be a footprint from the strider boots. Only a select few can achieve an elite status among the scout elves, who are exceptional in tracking. The information left Stetch dumbfounded, and he found it hard to swallow. He was reluctant to confess, but he had never been exposed to that word. Considering their notoriety and the widespread fear they caused, he wondered how he could have missed hearing about them. As soon as Elena revealed the information, her face transformed with anger, and she glared at Stetch, telling him that those who hear about them don't live to tell the tale. Stetch appeared baffled, unable to utter a word. Elena, still seething, elaborated further, and after she was done, she suggested moving forward. In the middle of the road, they decided to halt due to their suspicion regarding the girl's lack of hearing any animal noises. Stetch, however, found nothing unusual about it, as it is typical for animals in the dark forest to remain quiet. Elena, on the other hand, was extremely thrilled as she didn't sense anything around her. She had the impression that they were being pursued by someone, but she couldn't figure out why they were doing it out in the open and not approaching them. She made several attempts to use her detect hostility skill, and after a while, she sensed that something was off. The girl then realized that this was not just hostility but a deliberate intention to kill her. She was confused about why this was happening and how. Upon realizing the situation, she quickly changed her facial expression to surprise, but it was too late for Stetch, who was shot before he could fully understand what was happening and couldn't utter a word. He instantly dropped to the ground. Elena met the same fate as Stetch, she was shot and fell to the ground beside him. The two individuals responsible for this then sat in the bushes and watched. Elena slowly gathered the strength to rise, despite the overwhelming pain and exhaustion that gripped her. As she managed to stand, her eyes fell on Stetch, lying motionless and in a dire state. The weight of their situation hit her hard, but just as she took a breath, two figures emerged from the shadows, aiming their weapons directly at her. Before she could react, an arrow struck near her leg, making her wince in pain. The voices of the attackers were all too familiar. As they approached, Elena's heart sank. It was someone she knew. Anger flared within her, mixed with confusion. How could an acquaintance betray her like this? The unfamiliar girl with the bow looked at Elena with pure disdain, clearly disgusted that she had brought a human into elven territory. Elena's mind raced. She tried to explain, stammering out that Stetch needed to reach Mahogany for something crucial they had to accomplish together. But her words fell on deaf ears. The man accompanying the girl rummaged through Stetch's bag, pulling out a medallion that made his eyes widen in realization. This wasn't just any human, this was someone important. Jester, the man, revealed information that left both women stunned. The girl's expression shifted from anger to shock as they demanded to know more about the relic Stetch carried. Elena tried to justify herself, but the tension was palpable. When they returned to the relic site, everyone around them fell silent, eyes widening at the sight of Elena, not because of her presence, but because of what she had brought with her. Stetch, barely clinging to life, was slung over Jester's shoulder, like a sack of grain. Elena's heart ached. She had failed to protect Stetch, and now they were treating him with utter disregard. Her sorrow turned into a mix of anger and helplessness. Jester, however, wasn't swayed by her words. He questioned her loyalty, doubting that she would be able to stand by what she had said in front of the elder elf. As they entered the hall, the elder elf stood waiting, a stern expression on her face. She praised Jester and the girl for their actions, leaving Elena feeling even more humiliated. The three of them stood before the matriarch with downcast eyes. Elena's shame weighed heavily on her as she couldn't even find the right words to explain herself. Without mercy, Stetch was tossed to the floor, his body limp and unconscious. No one moved to help him. He was an enigma to everyone around her. Who was this man, and what was his connection to the relic? Elena's heart broke seeing him treated like this, but she knew she had to find a way to protect him before it was too late. Jester spilled the entire story to the elder elf for how they caught Stetch, the mysterious human, and how they needed to figure out just who or what he really was. The woman, with a scrutinizing gaze, examined Stetch, half expecting him to be dead. Yet, despite losing an alarming amount of blood, he wasn't just alive, his wound was almost completely healed. For any ordinary person, this would have been a one-way ticket to the afterlife, but Stetch. His heart was still beating strong, defying all logic. The elder elf, both surprised and suspicious, ordered the bleeding to be stopped and had Stetch thrown into the dungeon, with Elena trailing behind her. The poor girl had no choice but to obey, even though her mind was spinning. As they walked through an incredibly beautiful house that seemed oddly out of place for what was happening, the elder elf began to unload some bad news. The mahogany dungeon had reached its maximum level, and the elves were barely holding it together. The spirit within the dungeon was on the brink of escaping, which was more than enough to make Elena's heart drop. The conversation only got worse. The elder elf, clearly disappointed, reminded Elena that not only had she allowed Stetch to take the relic, but she'd also helped him do it. Any attempt at defending herself was quickly shut down. This was not a discussion, it was a reckoning, and the elder elves weren't about to let it slide. Just when the tension couldn't get any thicker, Stetch regained consciousness. Confused, in pain, and thoroughly disoriented, he tried to get up but found it nearly impossible. The pain was too intense, but the scene around him was even worse. A crowd of angry, hostile faces surrounded him, clearly not thrilled about his continued existence. Stetch, not one to panic, started talking to them. Mortimer, a conversation that, frankly, added another layer of what the heck is going on to this already chaotic scene. He was furious, confused, and clueless about why he was in so much pain and what had happened to land him in this mess. The mortem filled him in, letting him know that he'd been out cold for 3 days. And as it turns out, Stetch wasn't just unaware he was in a public execution site, where the next item on the agenda was likely his own trial. The elder elf demanded silence from the crowd as they began to converse with Stetch. If he was hoping for some good news, he was definitely in the wrong place. Stetch had only one thought racing through his mind: what had happened to Elena, and where was she? Off to the side, Elena stood, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Her mind was spinning, weighing all the possible fates that could befall Stetch. The dread was almost palpable. Seeing no way out, Stetch made a decision: he would admit his guilt. The moment the words left his mouth, the crowd went wild. They screamed for his execution, their cries echoing through the space. Stetch realized then that this wasn't just about him. Elena's fate was tied to his. The elder elf, stern and unyielding, continued to fire questions at Stetch while the crowd around them descended further into chaos. Stetch, cornered and desperate, admitted to his actions. But the woman's next question stopped him cold. She demanded to know why he had entered the dark forest. Stetch hesitated but then revealed his true intent: to destroy every last dungeon within the forest. Jester and his partner were in shock. This revelation was beyond anything they had imagined. Elena, visibly shaken, feared what would come next. The elder elf, skeptical that Stetch could accomplish such a feat alone, pressed him for more details. Surely, he hadn't done this by himself, or there must have been troops. She demanded he revealed their location. The weight of her words hit Stetch like a ton of bricks. He knew he couldn't divulge anymore, so he turned inward, seeking advice from the mortem. The woman, growing increasingly frustrated with his silence, ordered Jester to take action. Jester, with a cruel smile plastered on his face, stepped forward. He approached Stetch with a menacing glare, and without warning, he struck. The punch landed squarely on Stetch's face, sending him reeling. Pain exploded through him, but with his hands bound, he was helpless to defend himself. The crowd roared in approval, their bloodlust only growing as Jester wound up for another hit. Tension gripped the scene as the focus shifted to Elena. They demanded to hear her side of the story, but fear paralyzed her. Torn between the truth and the consequences, she chose to tell the truth, knowing full well the stakes. Meanwhile, Stetch, despite the beating, resolved not to give up. If he was going down, he would go down fighting. Stetch, with a fiery determination, took all hits from the elf. Jester, unsure whether this was a bluff or the real deal, watched warily. He couldn't shake the thought that Stetch had somehow managed to defeat 2 dungeons, a feat that should have been impossible without military-level training. The elder elf, skeptical of Stetch's abilities, argued that such a task required elite training and experience. As the intense battle between Stetch and Jester raged on, The crowd was captivated, unable to tear their eyes away. Stetch, though wary, held on to the hope that Elena wouldn't betray him, despite the immense pressure she was under. The stakes were high, and the tension was palpable. Elena, torn between loyalty and truth, decided to tell everything as it was. For her, the elder elf, this was a shocking revelation. The room fell into an eerie silence as everyone processed what had just been revealed. All eyes were on Stetch, the supposed underdog, now standing tall amidst the chaos. Jester's partner, the first to break the silence, called out to the elder elf. Panic swept through the crowd. No one knew what to do next. The elder elf and the audience were in shock. How was this man still alive after everything he had endured? What kind of person was he? Stetch, fueled by anger, invited Jester to continue the fight, challenging him to a relentless 2-day battle. He was determined to see who would break first, him or Jester. But Jester wasn't intimidated. On the contrary, he was more eager than ever to prove that Stetch was nothing compared to him. Elena, watching the unfolding events, realized the situation was far more complex than she had thought. The elder elf had initially claimed that this was the limit, but seeing Stetch in action, it was clear that this was far from the truth. Jester, too, was beginning to understand that his opponent was far stronger than he had anticipated, capable of absorbing the morale and essence of the dungeon itself. The Mortem, observing from the sidelines, was frustrated that Stetch was taking too many hits. He couldn't understand why Stetch hadn't yet used his air blast, a move that could have turned the tide. But Stetch, more cunning than he appeared, knew that causing a disturbance now could create more problems than it would solve. The elder elf was in disbelief. How could a mere human wield such powerful magic? It was beyond the laws of their world, and the implications were terrifying. The battle wasn't just physical anymore, it was a clash of beliefs, power, and the very fabric of their reality. Jester's partner, in a shocking move, suggested releasing the monster. The suggestion left everyone stunned, as it was an extreme measure to test whether Elena was telling the truth. Jester, playing his part, pretended to back down and told Stetch to calm down. But Stetch wasn't fooled. He knew something was off. As soon as his hands were untied, an eerie sound filled the air, making his heart race. Before he could fully process what was happening, a massive armored bear charged at him. Stetch was taken aback. How had they managed to tame such a beast? This creature was no ordinary opponent. Elena, watching in horror, doubted Stetch's ability to handle the situation. She feared that he might not survive this brutal encounter. The crowd held its breath, eager to see if a mere human could take down such a terrifying monster. It seemed unfair as Stetch had no weapons, yet they expected him to face this colossal threat. Stetch quickly realized that the best strategy against this monster might be to escape. But he wasn't one to back down easily. With a swift motion, he launched a fireball straight at the armored bear. The beast roared in fury, barely fazed by the attack. It was clear that this fireball was no match for such a formidable opponent. Determined not to give up, Stetch decided to go all out. He summoned an air explosion, a sudden flash of energy that shot directly at the bear. The creature's eyes burned with rage, its fury reaching new heights. Without hesitation, the monster began to strategize, preparing to annihilate Stetch. The armored bear charged at him with terrifying speed. The crowd was in disbelief. How could this monster withstand such powerful attacks? And more importantly, how could Stetch, a seemingly ordinary human, stand a chance against it? The armored bear closed in on Stetch, who was bracing himself for the ultimate test of his strength and resolve. The tension was palpable, and everyone was on the edge of their seats, waiting to see if Stetch could pull off a miracle. As the battle reached its climax, Stetch knew he had to make his move. The bear, now angrier than ever, swung at him with its massive paws, but Stetch was ready. He countered with his most powerful attack, an arc of energy that struck the monster with such force that it finally let out a scream of pain. Jester's partner couldn't believe what she was witnessing, as she had underestimated Stetch, thinking he could only manage with magical items, but here he was, taking down an armored bear with sheer skill and determination. Elena and her elder were left speechless. Elena allowed herself a small, relieved smile. Stetch had proven that she was right to believe in him. However, the battle wasn't over. The bear, though wounded, was far from defeated. it continued its assault, and Stetch realized that his magical power was nearly depleted. If this fight dragged on, he knew he could be in serious trouble. Then, something clicked in Stetch's mind. He noticed the bear reacting to what seemed like lightning. If he could harness that, maybe he could end this once and for all. With renewed confidence, he charged at the bear, using his agility to outmaneuver it. The bear, focused on where Stetch had been, didn't see him coming from behind. Stetch leapt onto its back, unleashing his signature fireball right into its mouth. The blast was powerful, and the bear let out another agonized roar. Not stopping there, Stetch, in a fierce and primal move, tore open the bear's mouth and ripped out its tongue. The beast was finally down, and Stetch stood victorious, bloodied but proud. The ground around them was scorched, and the air was thick with the smell of burning flesh. Jester and his partner were in shock. They had never expected a simple guy like Stetch to pull off such a feat. The entire Elder Elf Council was equally stunned, especially Elder Paris, who was displeased by how Stetch had defied the natural order with his actions. The Elder Elf, who had doubted her granddaughter, felt a pang of guilt and embarrassment. She realized she had been wrong about Stetch and Elena. Just then, a voice from above called out to Stetch. It was the Elder Elf, still demanding answers. She wanted to know why Stetch had taken the relic from Elena. This question infuriated Stetch. He hadn't even known it was a relic at the time, and had no intention of taking it for himself. His anger only fueled his resolve as he stood before them, ready to defend himself and Elena from whatever might come next. Stetch stood quietly as the Elder Elf addressed him. She acknowledged that if he truly intended to destroy the mahogany tree, there was nothing they could do to stop him. In fact, they could even assist him. Stetch noticed the tension in the air, as Elena, with a determined look, offered to accompany him to help destroy the dungeon. However, the Elder Elf was vehemently against it. Elena argued that no matter how strong Stetch might be, he couldn't handle it alone, but the Elder Elf remained resolute. Elena was to be punished for her actions, and though Stetch understood the Elder Elf's perspective, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. Elena was taken aback by Stetch's words. As the Elder Elves continued to speak in raised voices, Stetch calmly assured them that he was not as weak as they believed. His artifact had grown stronger, and he was prepared to take on the challenge of the dungeon. However, he needed his belongings, along with a few vials of potions, to proceed. The Redwood Dungeon, guarded by elves to prevent its expansion, had breached its containment, and the situation was growing dire. Elf soldiers were overwhelmed, unable to contain the roots of the red tree, and General Nazir had been captured by its tendrils. Suddenly, fireballs began to destroy the tree, giving the soldiers a brief moment of hope, thinking reinforcements had arrived. However, they were shocked to discover that it was a human Stetcher who had come to their aid. The general, infuriated, questioned what a man was doing in the dark forest, but Jester immediately defended Stetch, declaring that he would not allow him to be harmed. The soldiers were astonished by how much the Striders protected Stetch and wondered about the magic he possessed. Jester quickly informed them that Stetch might be their last hope. Without hesitation, Stetch bid farewell and entered the dungeon. A heavy silence fell over the room as everyone became lost in their own thoughts. After some time, Elena mustered the courage to question her elder about why she allowed Stetch to go. The Elder Elf was visibly upset by the question, considering the dangers of sending Elena to such a perilous place. The Elder Elf, burdened by the loss of her daughter-in-law to monsters and her only son to the mahogany, was unwilling to risk her only remaining family member, her granddaughter. Elena, however, was troubled by the fact that their tribe was suffering because of the mahogany dungeon. She knew that if the monsters managed to destroy those defending the entrance, the entire forest could be transformed into a continuous dungeon. Despite the Elder Elf's anger, Elena was determined to go, hoping that by reaching the mahogany tree, she might be able to bring her father back. But the Elder Elf, driven by fear and the desire to protect her granddaughter, was steadfast in her refusal to allow Elena to embark on such a dangerous mission. As Stetch continued deeper into the dungeon, he realized that a backup plan was necessary in case he failed. Elena as the Elder Elf had already formulated such a plan, confident that this time, they might achieve some semblance of peace for the elves. Despite her grim determination, the weight of the situation was heavy on her heart. Meanwhile, Stetch was navigating the dark, eerie dungeon, where the stench and the sight of bones beneath his feet made each step more unnerving. The creatures in the dungeon were unlike anything he had seen before, possibly unique to the mahogany tree. Knowing he couldn't afford to lose consciousness, Stetch activated his pathfinding skill, which guided him through the treacherous maze. As he ventured further, Stetch decided to test his theory about the presence of underground water. He drove his sword into the ground, and to his astonishment, a funnel appeared. Realizing the danger, he fled, aware that a long and perilous journey still lay ahead. Along the way, he encountered creatures that triggered a horrible realization: they were draining the life from anyone trapped in them. Stetch came across lifeless elf soldiers, their bodies drained by the creatures. He managed to wake one, who, in a state of panic, insisted they were all doomed. Stetch, attempting to calm him, gave him an escape scroll so he could save the others and leave the dungeon. However, the elf pleaded for more help, mentioning someone named Keen Drainer, who had previously aided them. Each mention of Keen caused the branches to dig deeper into the elf's face, intensifying his pain. Stetch, though perplexed by the elf's request, knew he had to press on. He couldn't afford to be delayed any longer, as the stakes were too high, and the fate of the forester and possibly more AI hung in the balance. As he pushed forward, the sight of a grotesque creature stopped him in his tracks. The creature, feeding off blood, seemed to come alive, its roots reaching out menacingly. Stetch, not knowing what he was up against, tried to destroy the creature with an air blast, but the creature's defenses were too strong. Frustration turned to anger as he realized that the creature was more formidable than he had anticipated. Desperate, Stetch used a fireball, hoping to burn through the creature's defenses, but once again, the creature proved resilient, forming a barrier of blood. Each attack seemed to strengthen the creature rather than weaken it. Determined not to give up, Stetch remembered something Keen Drainer had said about needing to deliver multiple strikes to overcome a powerful foe. Gathering his strength, Stetch launched a relentless assault, only to realize that the creature was absorbing his magical energy, making it even harder to defeat. In the heat of battle, Stetch made a critical mistake. The creature's tentacles pierced through him, leaving him hanging by one arm. Pain coursed through his body as he struggled to free himself. Despite the dire situation, Stetch managed to drink a potion given to him by the elves, which revitalized him just enough to keep fighting. The creature, thinking it had won, was caught off guard when Stetch began to fight back with renewed vigor. Stetch knew he had to act quickly. He devised a plan to use the creature's own strength against it. Combining his air blast and fireball in a powerful combo, he created a massive explosion. The heat was unbearable, but Stetch could see that his efforts were starting to pay off. As he closed in on the creature, he noticed a weak point and, with wild determination, struck at it with all his might. In a final, desperate move, Stetch drove his hand deep into the creature's core, confident that he will finally overcome the dungeon's twisted guardian. Stetch found himself in deep trouble as he was battling a creature that was as relentless as it was vile. Just when he thought he had gained the upper hand, the creature began to devour his hand, sending waves of pain through his body. Realizing the dire situation, Stetch quickly invoked the curse aura, but the creature's strength made it difficult to maintain his grip. Despite the overwhelming pain and exhaustion, Stetch refused to give in, drawing on every ounce of anger and determination within him to fight back. He finally unleashed the Curse Devourer, which allowed him to overcome his struggle against the monstrous creature. Outside the dungeon, the elves gathered anxiously around the red tree, deeply concerned about Stetch's fate. They had no way of knowing if he was still alive, as he had ventured into the dungeon alone without any means of communication. The tension among the elves grew, especially as an elder, one of their leaders, expressed her desire to enter the dungeon herself to suppress its growing threat. The elves were worried for her safety, but their concerns were interrupted when an elf soldier emerged, carrying General on his shoulders as Stetch had managed to save them both. The sight of the elves who had been presumed lost, caused a stir among the elves. Elena and her elder could hardly believe their eyes, and they rushed to help the exhausted survivors. Elena was overjoyed to find her father alive, though he was barely conscious. As the elf soldier urgently called for reinforcements to assist Stetch, the general hesitated, unsure whether to act on the words of a mere soldier. But the soldier's pleas were soon punctuated by a massive explosion from within the dungeon. The ground shook, and debris flew through the air as dust and rubble erupted from the dungeon's entrance. Panic spread among the elves, and the elder elf knew that Stetch was in grave danger. The general finally ordered Jester and Ida to enter the dungeon and assist Stetch. Meanwhile, Stetch himself came out of the dungeon. Despite his injuries, he could not believe that how close it was for him this time. When he finally saw everyone outside the dungeon, he was met by a crowd of elves who had gathered around him. Stetch hadn't expected to see so many people, and he was taken aback by the outpouring of gratitude from the elves. They thanked him for his bravery in saving them and for destroying the mahogany tree. In their eyes, Stetch had become a true hero, a symbol of hope in their darkest hour. The scene shifts to the northern borders, where everything has been neglected for quite some time. Training targets and abandoned swords are scattered around, a testament to the lack of activity in the area. However, the quiet doesn't last long, as troops begin to arrive, ready to move out at a moment's notice. The prince, aware of the situation, asks Ballstock to stay behind a bit longer. Ballstock, surprised, doesn't quite understand what the prince is hinting at. The prince hands him an envelope containing a letter. Inside, the letter explains that one of his scouts has accidentally discovered a new dungeon. The urgency is clear: he needs to assemble the best warriors immediately and secure valuable artifacts hidden within before anyone else can. The prince emphasizes the importance of discretion, cautioning that any misstep could spark an international scandal. With that, the prince sets off toward the northern borders, ordering Ballstock to return to him as soon as the task is complete. The stakes are high, and the weight of the mission hangs heavily on Ballstock's shoulders as he prepares to carry out the prince's orders. Elena and Stetch walked in silence, both still processing the events that had transpired. After a long pause, Stetch finally spoke, hinting to Elena that her presence in the human village might draw unwanted attention. He suggested that she might be better off staying hidden, worried that others might recognize her as something other than human. However, Elena assured him that they had nothing to worry about as she could blend in with the humans without issue. Stetch, still concerned, thought this might be some kind of elven magic. Among the elves, there were those who could sense and see magical flows, and sometimes even stranger phenomena occurred when the power in the atmosphere concentrated at one point, creating dungeons. Stetch assumed that a new dungeon was forming nearby, and his suspicions were soon confirmed. He quickly formulated a plan to take over the dungeon before it fully emerged. Elena, not wanting to leave Stetch's side, insisted on accompanying him. Initially surprised, Stetch realized that Elena's skills could be invaluable in their mission. As a former strider, Elena was unmatched in battle, expertly wielding her bow and never missing a shot. Moreover, her ability to explore dungeons could prove crucial. Cautious, they journeyed toward a small village where they could rest before continuing their quest. Stetch warned Elena to avoid drawing attention, reminding her that he was a wanted man. The gravity of the situation was clearer: they had to be extremely careful. As they approached the village, a watchman asked for their names. Stetch, mindful of his wanted status, gave a false name. Elena, about to reveal her real name, quickly followed Stetch's lead and provided a different name. The watchman eyed them suspiciously but allowed them entry. Pleased with how Elena handled the situation, Stetch praised her, though she was puzzled by the need to hide their identities. Realizing he hadn't fully explained his circumstances, Stetch decided it was time to tell Elena the truth. They found a local bar where they could talk without being overheard. Elena was unaccustomed to the noise and bustle of the bar, a stark contrast to the quiet of the forest. They ordered drinks, and Stetch encouraged Elena to try the beer. However, after just a few sips, Elena was repulsed by the taste, comparing it to dirty water. Stetch chuckled, realizing that non-humans might find human tastes strange. As they snacked on bread and talked, Stetch revealed that he was wanted for revenge against the king. Elena was shocked by this revelation but quickly pieced together what it meant. She understood why Stetch had saved her people and decided to repay him by helping him on his quest. Stetch, touched by her loyalty, accepted her offer. Their conversation was interrupted when Stetch overheard nearby strangers discussing the presence of troops stationed along the roads, a sign that the city was on high alert. Stetch knew this would complicate their mission, especially with unknown dangers lurking in the forest. Determined to find a way forward, Stetch began devising a plan. They needed to find someone who could help them navigate the dangers ahead. After some searching, they found a man whose route aligned with their needs. but he refused to join them as he already had companions. Undeterred, they continued their search and eventually encountered a wealthy merchant named Farquaad Filch. The square was chaotic, with people scrambling to find travel companions, but Stetch's quick thinking allowed them to secure a place in Farquaad's caravan. Now, with a plan in place and allies by their side, Stetch and Elena prepared to embark on the next leg of their journey, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Stetch was questioned by a man who introduced himself as an adventurer, curious about Stetch's activities. Stetch, wary of revealing too much, claimed he was exploring dungeons and collecting trophies. The man shared that he, too, once dreamed of becoming an adventurer but was injured by goblins as a child, which ended his aspirations. Stetch, on edge, warned Elena to stay vigilant as she was the only one who could sense danger. She readily agreed, understanding the seriousness of their situation. They decided to stop at the edge of the road for a quick meal. Elena informed everyone that everything seemed quiet, with no immediate danger in sight. But suddenly, one of their companions collapsed without warning, causing Stetch to panic. Unsure of what had happened, Elena sensed that magical particles had already spread and knew they needed to act quickly to avoid being affected. Hiding behind some bushes, Elena spotted strange people examining the soldiers and their belongings. The people, surprised by the number of soldiers, debated whether to take everything from them. However, they decided to take the jewelry and have a roasted meal over a fire. They cleaned some items to avoid suspicion and began collecting expensive equipment, despite the difficulty. As the people continued, they noticed that Stetch was unaffected by their magic, which should have incapacitated him. Enraged by this discovery, they attacked him as a group. Stetch, although outnumbered, fought back fiercely. Despite the overwhelming odds, he managed to land powerful blows that left his attackers unable to get back up. The onlookers were baffled by how Stetch could still fight, even under the influence of such potent magic. Stetch's connection with Mortem, his artifact, seemed to have strengthened, giving him the resilience needed to withstand the magic. The leader of the gang, seeing his plans unravel, decided to end the fight quickly. Suddenly, the leader began to dissolve and reappeared behind Stetch, delivering a powerful blow that sent him flying. Stetch, in great pain, was caught off guard by the leader's ability to disappear and reappear instantly. Despite enduring powerful attacks, Stetch's abilities surprised the gang leader, who had expected him to succumb to Sheila's magic. Sheila, frustrated that her magic wasn't working, demanded that they take something valuable from Stetch. At that moment, Elena, who had been watching from a tree, couldn't comprehend how the entire gang vanished so quickly. Stetch, struggling to stay conscious, found himself unable to keep up with his opponent. He was confused and angry that Mortem didn't intervene during the battle. The mysterious gang had taken something valuable from him, leaving Stetch and Elena with more questions than answers as they continued their journey through the dark forest. Stetch found himself in a tense encounter with a group of robbers led by a man named Garrett. One of the robbers, noticing Stetch communicating with Mortem, grew increasingly uneasy. Despite Garrett extending a hand in a friendly gesture, introducing himself, and inviting Stetch to join their group, Stetch was visibly uncomfortable and hesitant to accept the offer. Garrett, a self-proclaimed patriot who claimed to rob the rich to help the poor, misunderstood Stetch's reluctance as a rejection of their cause. The situation grew more heated as Garrett insisted, but Stetch firmly declined, further irritating Garrett. One of the other robbers, already suspicious of Stetch, voiced his displeasure, questioning why they needed him at all. Garrett, who viewed this particular robber with disdain due to his background, dismissed the concerns and continued to press Stetch. The tension in the air was thick as Garrett's frustration mounted, and he slammed his hand on the table in anger. Just then, the atmosphere shifted dramatically as the group was suddenly ambushed. Chaos erupted as arrows flew from unseen attackers, catching the robbers off guard. Despite having guards posted everywhere, they were unable to fend off the attack. Garrett, caught off guard, grew increasingly angry at the failure of his men to protect their territory. Stetch, recognizing the chaos as an opportunity, quickly made his escape. He ran past the tree where Elena was hiding, though he didn't notice her at first. Once they found each other, they realized they needed to flee the area immediately. As they made their escape, Garrett attempted to pursue them, fueled by anger not only at their refusal to join but also at their audacious departure. Garrett, determined and furious, tried to catch up with them, but Stetch and Elena were too fast. The robbers, wounded and disoriented, couldn't keep up, allowing Stetch and Elena to put some distance between themselves and their pursuers. Garrett, unwilling to give up, attempted to sneak up on Stetch using a disappearing trick, but the duo remained serious and focused, determined to outmaneuver him. In the end, despite the tension and danger, Stetch and Elena managed to evade Garrett's pursuit, leaving the robbers behind to deal with the aftermath of the ambush. As Stetch faced off against Garrett, Mortem warned him to be cautious, predicting that Garrett would aim for his stomach. True to Mortem's warning, Garrett launched an attack targeting Stetch's midsection. Fortunately, Stetch managed to dodge the blow, which surprised Garrett. Stetch noticed an artifact on Garrett's shoulder, enabling him to move between the spiritual and material worlds. This made Garrett appear as a ghostly figure, difficult to see with the naked eye. Realizing he needed to stay one step ahead, Stetch heeded Mortem's advice during the battle. Meanwhile, Mortem noticed something crucial and signaled Stetch to dodge right. Stetch complied, using a powerful cross-strike that left Garrett struggling to keep his balance. Despite the successful attack, Garrett refused to back down, his anger boiling over as his eyes blazed with fury. Recognizing the need for backup, Stetch called for Serena's help. She swiftly joined the fray, launching arrows at Garrett, further unsettling him. Garrett began doubting his abilities, and the second robber, Shiel, couldn't comprehend how Stetch was able to anticipate their boss's movements and block their attacks. The battle between Stetch and Garrett raged on. Shiel realized that Stetch was a formidable opponent, matching their boss in skill. Sensing that Garrett needed assistance, Shiel and the other robbers attempted to intervene. However, Elena, watching from above, began hurling stones at Shiel, distracting him. Shiel quickly realized that Elena possessed magical skills, making her a formidable adversary. Seeing his men struggle, Garrett grew increasingly frustrated. At that moment, a merchant man, who had partnered with Elena and Stetch, appeared, rallying additional support. The reinforcements launched an all-out attack, but in the chaos, they mistakenly targeted Stetch, assuming he was an enemy. Amid the darkness, the situation grew more dire. Despite the option to escape, Stetch knew that fleeing would only lead to more trouble. Forced into a corner, he launched a counterattack, stunning his adversaries with his determination. The robbers, especially Garrett and Shiel, were shocked by Stetch's resilience and his ability to withstand all the people. Garrett, seeing that his usual tactics weren't working, ordered Shiel to use magic to suppress the Helmet Man. Shiel used the trick up his sleeve here. He used a drag skill that greatly aided him in the fight. Despite Garrett's attempts to coordinate his men and keep the upper hand, the situation was quickly slipping out of his control. As the battle continued, Garrett, now serious, instructed Shield to support the other robbers with magic. However, the Helmet Man sensed danger and prepared to attack. Garrett, trying to strike, found his efforts thwarted by the helmet that protected his target. Before Garrett could react, the Helmeted Man retaliated, hurling Garrett aside and splattering blood across the battlefield. In the chaos, Stetch intervened, launching a fireball at the Helmet Man. The intense heat and flames left the Helmet Man reeling, leaving Garrett shocked to witness Stetch's powers. In retaliation, the Helmet Man drew a massive sword from the ground, preparing to exact his revenge. Stetch narrowly avoided the blow, and the fight became more intense as he began to understand the Helmet Man's techniques. Using his own skills, Stetch delivered a powerful kick to his knee, but the thug remained standing. Just as the fight seemed to reach its peak, Elena swooped in to assist Stetch. With surprising agility, she jumped on the Helmet Man's neck, trying to put him in a headlock. Despite her delicate appearance, Elena managed to bring the fierce thug down, smashing his head against a stone. Even his helmet offered no protection. He lay motionless, defeated. Stetch was furious, seething at being at Garrett for attacking him, unable to slip away unnoticed. His anger with the royals boiled over, and now, armed with their resources, he intended to teach them a harsh lesson. He unleashed Arc, electrocuting the remaining people with his power, stunning everyone around him. They were all taken aback by Stetch's abilities, especially since the merchant was just an ordinary guy, someone they never expected to be capable of such feats. The robbers watched in awe. They had never witnessed anything like this before. The entire forest seemed enchanted, and they couldn't comprehend what was happening. Stetch and Elena's fellow traveler were soon captured and tied up. The traveler, still believing Stetch was in league with the robbers, wasn't shocked by this turn of events. Stetch, however, blamed him for everything, convinced that it was his fault things had spiraled out of control. Garrett speculated on how the merchant had tracked them down, despite all their efforts to cover their tracks. The fellow traveler sighed heavily, contemplating his response. Garrett, the leader of the robbers, began piecing things together, realizing that the merchant might have used a surveillance marker, an expensive and tricky artifact to handle. All they needed now was to be left alone to take what they came for and leave. Amid the chaos, Stetch found a bottle. Without knowing its contents, he took a risk and drank it all. Garrett, observing him, speculated that Stetch might be connected to the royal family. Stetch neither confirmed nor denied it, but he remained puzzled by their motives. The robbers aimed to overthrow the corrupt king, who had long been exploiting local wealth, oppressing not only neighboring states but also his own people. Garrett and his men could no longer stand idly by as their country deteriorated. Stetch's traveling companion, a lobbyist for Venice, was part of a dwindling group, so few that they could be counted on one hand. Though their goals aligned, Stetch knew their path would be long and arduous. He was eager to leave this place as quickly as possible. Garrett worried that Stetch might expose them but lacked the time to address it, so he reluctantly let him go. Before parting, Garrett ordered his men to prepare for their next move, realizing their mission had been in vain. With a sly smile, Garrett extended his hand in farewell, hoping their paths would cross again. Thank you for watching. If you want me to continue this series, please let me know in the comment section and don't forget to like and subscribe. Till then, cheers.